You're good to go.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Well, good evening, everyone. This NVTC meeting. By my clock, we are starting the meeting at 7 o'clock on the dot. Given the ongoing public health emergency, we are, of course, conducting this meeting electronically. Please do note that our commission staff worked hard to follow all of the guidelines and procedures, enabling authority that allows us to meet virtually, including giving notice to the public. As well, this meeting is simultaneously being broadcast on YouTube. A couple of housekeeping reminders that I know everyone has a second nature, but if you could mute your microphone when you're not speaking, especially with so many of us on the call, that really does help cut down on background noise. We do have the chat function available, but as a reminder, no public business conducted there, which is to say no substantive discussion, but certainly questions about logistics or dialing in are very welcome there. And then, of course, as always, if you could just identify yourself if you are making or seconding a motion, that helps our secretary keep accurate minutes. So I'm going to now invite our secretary, Rhonda Gilchrist, to call the roll for the purposes of quorum. Rhonda, over to you.
Chair Crystal. Mr. Gary.
Present.
Mr. Alcorn.
Here.
Mr. Bell.
Here.
Ms. Bennett Parker.
Here.
Mr. De Ferenti.
Here.
Mr. Eben. Ms. Filler-Korn.
Here.
Mr. Faust.
Here.
Ms. Garvey.
Present.
Mr. Krizik.
Here.
Mr. Letourneau.
Present.
Mr. McKay.
Here.
Mr. Meyer.
Here.
Ms. Pelchik.
Present.
Mr. Reed.
Present.
Mr. Snyder. Mr. Sullivan.
Here.
Mr. Turner.
Here.
Mr. Walkinshaw.
Here.
Ms. Mitchell.
Here.
And I'd like to note that Ms. Mitchell will be voting tonight on all the votes for Mr. Smedberg. We do have quorum. The following staff are participating in the meeting: Executive Director Kate Mattice, Director of Finance and Administration Scott Colcorf, Director of Programs and Policy Alan Fye, NVTC Commission Secretary Rhonda Gilchrist, Web and IT Manager Melissa Walker, WMATA Program Manager Andrew DeVetter, Program Analyst Zachary Smith, Transit Technology Program Manager Patricia Happ, NVTC Legislative Liaison Amy Perrin-Seibert, NVTC Legal Counsel Steve McIsaac, WMATA's Virginia Government Relations Officer Greg Potts, VRE Chief Executive Officer Rich Dalton, VRE Chief Financial Officer Mark Schofield, VRE Chief of Staff Joe Swartz, DRPT Chief of Public Transportation Jennifer Jabrul, and PB Mayor's partner Dwight Buracker. I'll turn it back to the chair.
Thank you very much. All right, I trust everyone's had an opportunity to take a look at the agenda that was circulated last week. Just as a preview, we do have a number of action items tonight, particular to VRE, especially 5 different actions there, but 2 items on the consent agenda, the recurring one of the electronic meetings resolution, as well as our 2021 meeting schedule. We also have our auditor tonight, as Ms. Gilchrist noted, to give us brief presentations on our audited financial statements and our compliance report from fiscal year 2020, so the one that closed in July. We will also have an action item there, which is to accept and authorize distribution of that report. We will have a review, an action item on the report on the performance and condition of WMATA, which is to say the annual report that we have been tasked to deliver on WMATA by the General Assembly since 2018. Of course, we'll have an opportunity to discuss WMATA, certainly in the news and an issue of concern to the Commission, I know. We will approve our legislative and policy agenda. And again, those 5 VRE actions, I'm going to propose when we get there that we take them up in a block vote, unless anyone objects, just to prevent a laborious roll call vote process times 5. So that includes the annual financial report, VRE's legislative agenda, just like our Commission's legislative agenda, an agreement with Manassas Park about a parking garage, and 2 agreements, and these are important, especially with the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority for rail operations and access, and for passenger rail improvements and funding. These are agreements that really help make real some of those major shifts happening with the state acquisition of right-of-way and track and track from CSX. So lots to come on that. That agenda is on your screen for reference as well. Just as a couple of quick chair's comments, if you will. Each January, we vote on a slate of officers for that calendar year. Kate Mattice circulated on behalf of the executive committee some recommendations about essentially maintaining the executive committee, which is to say officers and committee chairmanship ships for the year ahead, given this unprecedented year and the still relative newness of, in fact, I think the majority of the commission. Certainly want to head off any awkwardness, and so if you have concerns about that you don't feel good about sharing with the members of the executive committee, we understand, and Kate will be a great liaison who can share feedback anonymously, but appreciate those who have sent emails in support to date. And just again, as a note, you'll see that recommendation for a vote at our January meeting. This is also a great time to reflect on whether you would like to change your committee memberships in 2021. If you'd like to roll off a committee, join a new one, etc. As I was joking with the executive committee an hour ago, if you have forgotten which committees you're on, it is 2020, and that is totally reasonable because it's been quite a year. So Kate included a link to all of your committee assignments if you need to take a look there. And as always, do let Kate know, or if I can answer questions, me know, if we can help you in that. All right, lastly, just a little bit of good news. I hope you'll join me in congratulating Matt Letourneau, Chairman Emeritus of this commission, one of Virginia's representatives to the WMATA board, who was recognized just last night with an award from the school in Mason for excellence in regional leadership. So Matt, I think we're all applauding from mute. We just appreciate you and congratulate you very much. I know it's been a challenging few months, so I hope that was a bright spot for you too.
Thanks, Katie. Thank you, everybody. And thanks, Kate, for a very nice introduction yesterday. I appreciate it.
That's enough for me. We're going to move into the consent agenda, which again features finding the need to conduct this meeting electronically, old hat by now, I think, and approving our 2021 meeting schedule. Before I ask for a motion, related, of course, to electronic meetings is the opportunity for public comment electronically. So let me turn it to Kate. I know we did receive at least one public comment for our consideration this evening. So Kate, did you want to speak to that?
Absolutely. So indeed, yes, we did receive one public comment that was forwarded to the commissioners. This is a comment of concern of the dramatic service cuts for WMATA. So I do know that we are going to have a conversation about that a little bit later today. But again, that comment was provided to all commissioners in advance of the meeting.
Great. Thank you so much. And I think very much a topic of discussion for later in our agenda. Okay, so is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll move. Bennett Parker.
Second, Sullivan.
Okay, great. That's been moved and seconded. I am going to ask our clerk to call the roll. Ms. Gilchrist.
Chair Crystal.
Aye.
Mr. Gary.
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn.
Aye.
Mr. Bell.
Aye.
Ms. Bennett Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Dave Prenti.
Aye.
Mr. Eben.
Aye.
Ms. Filler-Korn.
Aye.
Mr. Faust.
Aye.
Ms. Garvey.
Aye, having trouble unmuting.
Thank you. Mr. Krizik.
Aye.
Mr. Letourneau.
Aye.
Mr. McKay.
Aye.
Mr. Meyer.
Aye.
Ms. Palchik.
Aye.
Mr. Reed.
Aye.
Mr. Snyder.
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan.
Aye.
Mr. Turner.
Aye.
Mr. Wackett.
Aye.
And Ms. Mitchell.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes.
Thank you very much. Okay, so our next action item is to approve the minutes of our November 5th meeting last month. Let's go ahead and just get a motion on the table for that. can we get a motion for approval of the minutes?
Bell,
Eileen.
motion approval.
Great.
I'll take
Second.
Second.
Ms. Garvey.
Oh my goodness, everyone's so participatory. Thank you.
All help.
Give that to Ms. Garvey, whom I think I heard. Great, that's been moved and seconded. So any discussion on the minutes of November 5th? Okay, so I'm going to turn again to our secretary to call the roll. And of course, yay or abstain is fine on the minutes.
Chair Crystal,
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre,
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn,
Aye.
Mr. Bell,
Aye.
Ms. Bennett Parker,
Aye.
Mr. De Ferrenti,
Abstain.
Mr. Eben,
Aye.
Ms. Filler-Korn,
Aye.
Mr. Faust,
Yes.
Ms. Garvey,
Aye.
Mr. Krizik,
Aye.
Mr. Letourneau,
Abstain.
Mr. McKay,
Aye.
Mr. Meyer,
Aye.
Ms. Pelchik,
Aye.
Mr. Reed,
Aye.
Mr. Snyder,
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan,
Aye.
Mr. Turner,
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw,
Aye.
Ms. Mitchell.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Great, thank you so much. So we have next the audits from fiscal 2020. We have our auditors here tonight from PB Maris to give a presentation on the fiscal year 20 audits, or audit plural, including both the financial statements and our compliance reports. The headline is, of course, good news and unqualified clean opinion about our statements and that they accurately present the financial position of NVTC. So hopefully I've not scooped Scott, but always good to lead with the good news lest anyone fear from this presentation. And Scott Colcorf, our CFO, I'm going to turn over to you to introduce the auditors.
Hey, thank you, Madam Chair. Tonight we have Dwight Buracker representing NVTC's audit firm, PB Maris. Dwight, who's a partner with the firm, is also the partner in charge of the NVTC audit, and he's also the partner in charge of the VRE audit as well. Dwight will present the NVTC fiscal year 2020 audit results and answer any questions that you may have. Dwight?
Scott, thank you for that introduction and good evening, everyone. Had an opportunity before this meeting to meet with the executive committee to discuss the financials, so I'll try to keep this brief, and if there's any questions, please feel free to ask. First, just want to thank Kate and Scott, their staff. When we went into this audit, it was a purely remote audit. First time in my career for remote audits, and it went very smoothly. A lot of Zoom meetings and screen sharing to ensure that we could test the controls and things that were in place. So just want to reiterate the work that Scott and them did to make sure everything operated smoothly and continued to operate during this pandemic. The financial statements, there's only a handful of pages that belong to PB Maris. There's 3 opinions that we issue annually. In the financial statements, there's an opinion on the financial statements, an opinion on internal controls, the gas opinion, and then there's also an opinion related to the federal compliance, the federal funding that NVTC receives. All 3 of those opinions are unmodified, a clean opinion, the highest opinion that we can issue as auditors. So another clean year there. The only thing new in the financial statements this year relates to the I-395 fund activity. This was the first year we had to report the fund in the financial statements. So on page 17 and 18, as part of the statement of the balance sheet, you'll see the activity there. And then also there's the statement of changes, revenue, expenses, and change in fund balance. It shows the funding received along with the expenses associated with that for the year. There's also a new supplemental schedule, page 55 of the report, for those that may have a copy of it in front of you, that shows a breakdown and allocation between NVTC and PRTC's share of that 395 money, because each commission is allowed to can determine how that funding is used. So those are the only thing that's new in the financial statements this year. We did also issue a management letter this year that only contains upcoming GASB pronouncements. So there was no findings or anything to present, just the upcoming GASB pronouncements that may impact the commission moving forward. with that, I'll take any questions if anyone has any.
Okay. I think we can throw open the floor to that. Members of the commission, any questions about the financial statements? Okay, seeing none. It's hard to argue with an unmodified opinion, right?
Yep. Well, if there's no questions, I appreciate the time this evening and look forward to hopefully seeing you in person next year.
Oh my gosh, God willing. Well, thank you so much. And we know that you've had a busy night presenting as well to our sister commission over at PRTC. So, Mr. Baraka, thank you so much. And thank you for being the bearer of good news and for your analysis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Have a great evening.
Okay, great. So with that presentation behind us, could I have a motion to accept and then authorize the distribution of our fiscal 20 audited financial statements and of our client compliance report?
So moved.
Ms. Delegate Reed.
Okay, great. Motion from Delegate Reed. Do I have a second?
Second, DeFranchi.
Thank you very much. Okay, any further discussion? All right, hearing none, I'm going to turn again to Ms. Gilchrist to please call the roll.
Chair Crystal,
Aye.
Mr. Gary,
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn,
Aye.
Mr. Bell,
Aye.
Ms. Bennett Parker,
Aye.
Mr. Dave Ferrenti,
Aye.
Mr. Evan, Ms. Filler,
Aye.
Mr. Faust,
Aye.
Ms. Garvey,
Aye.
Mr. Krizik,
Aye.
Mr. Letourneau,
Aye.
Mr. McKay,
Aye.
Mr. Meyer,
Aye.
Ms. Pelchik,
Aye.
Mr. Reed,
Aye.
Mr. Snyder,
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan,
Aye.
Mr. Turner, Mr. Walkinshaw,
Aye.
Ms. Mitchell.
Aye.
The motion passes. I'll turn it back to the chair.
Thanks very much,
Madam
Ms.
Chair,
Gilchrist.
it's Adam. I think I might have been muted, and I concur.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mr. Evan. All right, we'll add that one to the record. Thank you. Okay. So to certainly a weighty topic on our agenda this evening, we'll move into our WMATA discussion. I'm going to invite Mr. Letourneau. I'm so sorry that you have to carry full freight here on account of Mr. Smedberg's kitchen accident, from which we hope he recovers swiftly. But I'll invite you to give an update. If you all could hold your questions for the WMATA board members till the end, I think it may make sense to do a break after Mr. Letourneau's presentation to have some discussion. I'm going to go ahead and say this before I hand it over to him and look forward to saying to him again. I think that we are all stunned by the severity of the cuts proposed in this Metro budget. I know we've all been hearing from our constituents about it. And I think that we can all feel really grateful that we have Mr. Letourneau and Mr. Smedberg on our team on behalf of Northern Virginia. They are getting their heads around this budget along with us, and I know will be prepared to advocate with us and certainly to advocate to the federal government, which at this point is probably our only option for getting out of a hole of this magnitude. I know sometimes our conversations can get a little bit spirited and too often they have to be the bearer of bad news, but I think it's worth noting that we are on the same team here, and I'll say it now and again that we thank them very much for our service and leading these conversations with us so that they can in turn represent Virginia back to the WMATA board. So with that preamble, or me having unburdened myself of that preamble, Matt, Ms. Letourneau, let me hand it over to you for an introduction on COVID response, anything you want to share about the budget or other items about WMATA.
Yeah, I will just briefly on other items. So I think you've probably seen the commercials, hopefully many of you have, that have been running that feature Teresa Empestado, our Chief Safety Officer, as well as other Metro employees detailing the level of care that is going into making the system safe. I know that was a topic at previous commission meetings about encouraging the public to still use transit, and I think that Metro has devoted almost its entire marketing budget to that end to this point. We did have another train separation incident recently. It is concerning that there have been two in recent months. The first one is still under investigation, as is this one. I don't have anything to share on that other than to tell you that it is being diligently investigated. On in other fronts, we continue to make progress with the Rail Operations Control Center. I think I've expressed in the past, some of the information that's come out about things that have happened there. There's kind of a lag, and so the board has been aware of a lot of these things and had already taken some steps, as has management, to rectify them. And I think we're making good progress in that front. But of course, the big news is on the budget. The board did recently make final the adjustments for fiscal year 21, which required about 175 million in reductions, which I think we were able to keep fairly benign in terms of impact. There are some longer headways, but still reasonable headways on rail. We were able to keep most of the major bus routes running with just some reductions. There were quite a few management actions and so on that got us to that point. Looking forward for fiscal year 22, that is not going to be the case. So to kind of walk you through the genesis of the problem, the Metro boards had a lot of discussions about trying to figure out what our ridership is going to look like and therefore what our revenue is going to look like. Of course, our revenue sources include the subsidies that we and the local governments provide, obviously the state government help that we get, and the federal government help in the form of capital contributions through PREA. And then revenue that's derived itself from the system. So when ridership drops, when ridership has a big decline, of course, so does revenue. The other sources, right now, we are projecting to be fairly stable. We can have some discussion about that, but assuming that they are stable, almost the entire discussion that we're having and the necessity to make major cuts is all generated by a lack of revenue coming into the system, revenue that Metro itself would have generated for itself, but now is not, mainly because rail ridership is about 15% of what it was. The scenario that is the underlying the general manager's proposed budget is not a worst case scenario from a ridership standpoint. It does assume some continued growth in ridership, both between now and the beginning of the fiscal year, and then as the fiscal year begins. So I want to be clear that we actually have looked at worse scenarios than what we presented publicly. They do exist internally. Then they are based on perhaps even more dramatic issues. I think given the news that's out there about vaccinations and the timeliness of that, I think there's reason to think that the scenario that the Metro board picked may end up being conservative. And I certainly hope that that's the case. But when you are producing a budget like this, it is much easier to add things back in than it is to subtract them, particularly when you consider the very intricate labor agreements that we have and the need for notifications and a lead time when it comes to bids. Just to change the service takes several months because you're changing employee schedules in a significant way. So looking at fiscal 22, we're anticipating revenue coming in at about 265 million against expenses of about 1.9 billion. The subsidies would be about 1.1 billion. We are assuming a 3% increase in that subsidy. I do want to note that 3% is on the adjusted numbers. It is not on the baseline numbers from the beginning of the last budget, so it is not as high as it would have been, and that's about 33 million. There are several exceptions to that. The 3% cap applies except for new service. So Silver Line Phase 2, since it was phased out of 21 and into 22, has a $36.5 million impact. The Cinderbed Road bus facility has a $3 million impact, and that is bringing that back online through WMATA instead of through contracting. And then increased safety support, which are things that we need to do to be compliant with the Metro Rail Safety Commission, is about another $2 million. So that leaves you with a funding gap of about $495 million. Management is proposing a series of actions totaling about 56 million, reducing contractors, deferments, performance increases for non-represented employees. These are non-union employees at Metro, and they are bearing the brunt of a lot of this because they've already taken a hit in 21. Employee wage increase deferments and employee management programs. Those things total 56 million. That includes some early retirement packages that Metro is offering to employees to try to incentivize some of them to retire, and so on. So then, looking at how we're going to close this $450-something million gap, one thing I really want to highlight, it has not gotten as much attention in the media as it probably should, and it's a significant thing for us, is a proposal to shift more maintenance costs to the capital budget. The concept is essentially to increase the transfer of the preventive maintenance costs to capital from 90 million to 250 million, and therefore decrease the FY22 operating budget and increase the FY22 capital budget by 160 million. So essentially what we're doing is shifting costs from the operating budget to the capital budget for preventive maintenance, and that's that 160 million. That is, in my view, not a good policy. I think Metro staff would agree that that's not a good policy, but it becomes, unfortunately, a necessity if we aren't going to cut service even deeper. The impact of doing that means essentially some of your normal preventive maintenance items become capital costs instead of operating costs. And that means that we will have to issue more debt to pay for those, and we are also going to essentially use up some of our debt capacity. I'm sure those of you who are, work on your local and county boards are very familiar. When you do your capital budget, you have a certain amount of debt capacity that you can spend, and then you can't issue more debt. That happens earlier for Metro if we are going to essentially shift that much money over from our operating budget to our capital budget. It is permissible. It's legally possible, but it's typically not a great practice. The other ways that the gap gets closed on rail, and rail takes the biggest hit here. We move to hours of operation of 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. only, Monday through Friday. There would be no weekend service. There will be an average of 30-minute headways on all lines. There will be some variance in that. The higher capacity corridors, such as the Red Line corridor, would likely see more frequent service, closer to 15-minute headways. That there's some dependency on what the actual volume looks like there. But on average, 30-minute headways. The yellow line would operate only to Mount Vernon Square. The red line would reinstitute turnbacks, which were on the table for FY21 and ultimately did not get implemented. But those turnbacks would essentially mean every other train runs the full lanes after you hit the outer stations. Very notably for all of us, the silver line would operate from Ashburn only to Ballston. It would not continue into the district, and you'd have to change trains at Ballston if you wanted to continue making that route. All trains would be eight cars, and then Metro would reinstitute the closure of the 19 Metro stations that closed earlier in the pandemic. And so to do that, that would allow us to reduce our FTE by about 1,500. We would lay off 1,500 rail employees, and we would save close to $200 million by instituting those cuts. The board has not received a specific line by line on each of those items yet, so I can't tell you exactly which of those contributes how much. Obviously, I'm sure we're going to get much deeper into this conversation, and we'll be seeing those numbers, but I don't have those tonight. On the Metro bus side, there's a policy preference to try to preserve more bus service because ridership is higher on bus, and because so many essential workers are relying on bus. But there is reductions to 41 lines of service, which are partially or fully covering 60 existing lines. So essentially reducing the number of lines, changing service significantly. There's a fairly complicated discussion about the specific changes to each route that the board just received. I'm not going to go into that level of detail. I will say, when you look at this, Virginia only ends up with something like 8 remaining Metro bus routes. Most of the other routes, obviously, we have our own service provided through the localities in many cases, but there are only 8 remaining Metro bus routes after you make all these changes that are being proposed. That's another 900 employees laid off and a savings of 105 million. System-wide, there is a adjustment on advertising revenue, which is a cost of 24 million. Obviously, when we're not running as much service, the value of the advertisements are less on our system. And then that's an additional 279 million total in savings when you add those things up. When you add in the 160 million I previously discussed on capital, then that closes the gap. What we don't have as part of the general manager's proposal, unlike last time, is extra, essentially. What we put into the public docket for FY21 was greater than the amount that the Metro Board actually had to cut, which did allow us to have some discussions with localities about services that we were able to restore or not cut as deeply. Right now for FY22, there have not been any proposals the general managers put forward that exceed the amount we think we have to cut. Of course, things can change. We are still at an early stage in this. I want to emphasize the Metro Board, similar to all of us in our jurisdictions, will not adopt the final FY22 budget until March or April, probably mid-March. We will go into a public hearing process. The board will authorize those later this month, and then there'll be extensive outreach and public hearings during the month of January and February, including input from our own Metro committee. So that's kind of the overview of what's happening. Now, obviously, you know, as I said at the beginning, our revenue is our revenue. We are legally obligated to provide a balanced budget. Should the federal government come in with more funding for transit, it would obviously help us, and it would help us alleviate some of this gap. I am sure every single person in this meeting joins me and everyone else in calling on Congress to step up and pass another package that would include aid for transit. How much aid is in a package and what sort of restrictions there may be on using it, all those things would have, you know, a great impact on what our actual service cuts would be should we receive it, as well as the timing of when all that happens. Because as I said, we have to be in preparation to do the things that we'll need to do several months in advance. And so that, you know, that leaves us with only a few months to really try to solve this problem. I know that in Richmond, they are dealing with the same sort of budget issues that we are in our localities. And so I'm not necessarily saying there's going to be more money or we should be asking for more money from Richmond, but obviously should more money become available from the state, and it would have to be Maryland, DC, and Virginia, that would be another avenue. Or us as localities could decide to increase our subsidy contributions greater than what we would normally do in order to help close this gap. And I think obviously we all have our own budget situations in our jurisdictions, and it may prove impossible for all of us to do that. But I'm just sort of outlining, those are the ways that this would not happen. I don't know yet how much sort of horse trading is going to be possible or available between things that we're cutting. Obviously for me, that Silverline piece really hurts. And I'm sure it does for others as well. So we'll just kind of have to get into that. But I'll go ahead and pause there, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you, Matt. And I think so that note to end on, right, about the pain that the Silverline causes, I know for you all in Loudoun and Fairfax, and I think each of us could share what this means, right? In Arlington, our long-held aspirations for a premium bus network on Columbia Pike would be decimated by this, to say nothing of the station closures. And I think that we're all feeling that. Certainly the worry about bus impacts, you articulated how few would be left in Northern Virginia and how reliant some of our most vulnerable community members in Northern Virginia, but also throughout the WMATA service area are on the bus network, really puts a fine point on how devastating this budget proposal would be. I'd love to ask the first question and then invite others. I think you outlined a couple of the ways. It seems to me nearly impossible, right, that the localities would be able to meet this gap, given its magnitude, but also, potentially some of the legal constraints on the increases in our growth and subsidy beyond 3%. I know we remain not just hopeful, but deeply determined to raise our voices to the loudest extent possible in that clamor for essential federal aid. The other way out of this, I think, would be if ridership can come back, if people, if there is widespread uptake of a vaccine that is starting to seem like a more real possibility. And so that is a very long wind up to the following pitch of a question. What I worry about is that how do we time this budget or the restoration of service to when riders come back, especially to rail? How do we ensure that when people are ready to get back on rail, they're not deterred by those, catastrophic 30-minute headways or total lack of weekend service? Could you tell us a little bit about the process, both for calibrating this budget up until the moment it takes effect in July, right, which I know we did with fiscal 21, or even, being able to adjust the budget once it's in effect, so that when ridership comes back, and I know we're all really committed to ensuring we're doing everything it can to encourage people to get back after a vaccine, that the service is there to match it.
Yeah, and I think that's the key point, and that's something we're working with management on specifically. It's, unfortunately, Metro is sort of like it's a big ocean liner. It can't turn on a dime, and so even as things do uptick, there's a lag between when we see those revenues and when we're able to sort of add service back. Just to give you some idea, though, in the scenario that we're using, we are anticipating ridership gains of, in a quarterly basis, of 6%, 8%, 17%, and 22%. So we are essentially getting us back to a situation where ridership is looking, I don't know, something like what it was kind of midway through the drop down when we hit the pandemic. And that, anybody can kind of make a guess on that, exactly when that would happen. One of the big factors is going to be the federal workforce. And so one of our most important partners is the General Services Administration, and understanding what their timing is going to be to bring employees back. We get an awful lot of ridership from that. And another one is DC Public Schools, actually, because they don't have their own bus system. They use Metro. So we're talking a lot to those type of employers to help understand what their timeline is. But I can't say that it's going to be a quick thing. If we do start to see a lot of improvement, we're not going to be able to sort of instantly do that. And I have the same concern about having our system there and able to operate in time for when people really do want to come back. The other factor with ridership, it's not just sort of folks, it's number one, people having a need to go somewhere. And right now, with a lot of businesses and work from home, that's diminished. But it's also, Metro being a good alternative to what their another route would be. So traffic, as we see traffic in the region increase and congestion increase, it will also increase Metro ridership, because then people will say, well, wait a minute, I want to go back to Metro instead of, taking this drive, which right now is taking me 30 minutes. But, we all know with traffic could easily take an hour plus. So those are all things to kind of track. I can't really answer your question with much precision at this point, but I agree with what your premise is, and I agree with what your point is, and those are all things that we're discussing with management as well.
Okay, thank you. Let me open it up. I think it's a manageable enough group that folks can just jump in, but I do see Delegate Sullivan maybe with the first question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Letourneau, I appreciate your work on this. What a mess. I have two quick questions. One, you mentioned 8 remaining bus routes in Northern Virginia. That's out of how many? How big is that cut? You don't have the exact.
Help me with this.
I don't need the exact number, but
I don't know. It's probably about 20. Andrew, do you know?
Not off the top of my head. We can pull it.
Yeah, it's going to be. Looking at it, it's probably going to be roughly 25 or so, but I don't want to.
So
it's a 60 or 70% cut.
Maybe even more. Yeah.
Delegate Sullivan, my staff has told us that we're going from about 26 routes to 4.
Okay.
To give you an idea.
And then
that's in Arlington, Ms. Garvey?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then Matt, I know your answer is probably going to be you have no idea, but I'm sure we're watching the Hill. We're talking, of course, to senators and Congress, all our congressional reps. There's this bill floating around for whatever it is, 800 or 900 billion. We have any idea whether there's any transit in there?
There is transit in there. I think it's about 15 billion. That's a lot less than what was in the CARES Act. And so we would not see the level of aid that we did see in the CARES Act. And so I do think even if that bill were to pass as is, there would have to be significant cuts to WMATA. I don't know the math on exactly what ultimately flows to WMATA, since obviously it's broken up amongst all the other transit agencies. But there is that particular bill is, like 908 billion, and that's sort of the problem solvers version. There's a Senate Republican version. There's a House Democrats version. The House Democrats also have money for transit in it as well. So the federal team at WMATA is highly engaged in this. And I want to make clear that our congressional delegation in the DC region, both Virginia, Delegate Norton, as well as Maryland, are all saying the same thing. I mean, everybody wants there to be aid. The senators, everybody's in agreement. And so I do feel like, our issue is not with our delegation as much as we get frustrated with Congress. It's with Congress as a whole. And it is not just Republicans, and I'm not just saying that. There are constituencies out there that just, if you don't represent urban transit areas, then this isn't necessarily a priority for you. You have other priorities. They may be farmers, they may be this, they may be that. And when there's only so much money to go around, those kind of food fights take place. So, we're as engaged as we possibly can be. We have great support from our local congressional delegation and from our senators. And we just have to hope that between now and then, and also I should mention that, without getting too much detail, obviously relationships with the administration also are really important. And those are things that WMATA is working on, current and future administration, incoming administration as well. So all those things are definitely in play.
Great. Thanks. Thank you, Mr.
Let me just add on the bus route issue, because I think that is a significant thing. My understanding, and we're going to get into this further, but my understanding of kind of the justifications for the decisions that were made on the consolidated route plan, it's based on ridership demand. It's based on equity issues, essentially where the preponderance of lower income or individuals without access to other transit exists, and redundancy. And I think that redundancy issue is one of the things that's resulting in some of Virginia seeing more reductions than the other jurisdictions are, because we've done a good job with our local networks. We are offering our own service through our different jurisdictions in some of these places. So I definitely want to get further into that. I understand equity from the perspective of needing to serve those who need it the most. But there's also equity from the standpoint of, Virginia putting money into the system and making sure that we are getting value back for it. And so a lot of times our value is coming more from the rail side, which is seeing the deeper cuts. So I do think there's a conversation that the Metro board needs to have about that.
Thanks, Matt. I think Ms. Garvey, can I see you with your hand up?
Yeah, I did. I'd like to sort of pursue this, but I think I'll go on to another question. And Matt, how to put, when you make cuts, right? So that, you say we save so much money by making a cut, but then the ridership comes back, as we're talked about, and then you got to rehire people, you got to get things up. There's a cost to that, right? I mean, and I think because we can't furlough employees, they got to be fired, I think. Then you got to, I think there are issues of training and certification, and are we factoring in, are you all factoring in the cost of actually then rehiring, which means the savings are like rather ephemeral, maybe in part?
Not as a budgetary matter, but the general manager has made the point that you just made, which is that one of our biggest concerns with this is that we have to lay off people who have skilled positions. And as you just said, we can't just go hire a subway operator off the street and put them in a train. That's a position that requires a significant amount of training. So I think the key to this issue is going to be a negotiation with the union, primarily ATU. And I really want to be careful about what I say here, but there are options besides layoffs that are this deep. For instance, and I don't know what all of you have done, but in my jurisdiction, we did freeze salaries for fiscal 21 that we're currently in. We're actually looking at unfreezing them now, but we froze them for most of this fiscal year. And that was one of the things that we were able to do to help us save money. You're right, that is not an option right now for Metro because of collective bargaining. It was collectively bargaining that the employees will receive, I think, 2.8, 2.9% pay increase. So this budget assumes that pay increase continues, just with fewer employees. Ultimately, it's really pretty much up to the union if they were to trade that pay increase for saving more jobs. And if they did that, that would mean that we would be able to save more service because the expense is less. So that's a discussion that management has with union leadership and that they are having amongst themselves. And it's not really something Metro can impose, but it is certainly worth a discussion because that's another way to see some savings here. In terms of the tangible costs for what the shutdown and then restart would cost, I don't have that number. I'm not sure if that number exists, but I agree that it is a real thing.
Thank you. And it would be good to ask. And then I know we're just at the beginning and it's going to take time, but I hope you will talk, and I'm sure that Metro will talk. I mean, the assumption that because we have some redundant routes, we can pick up the extra ridership may really be mistaken, or the thought that we can put more money into our system that's going to require. We're all broke. So anyway, I think as we go forward, I hope, and I'm sure, that Metro will look at the assumptions they've made and talk with the region, because I'm worried that some of the assumptions might not actually play out in real life. So thanks for all your work. And I know this is a tough time and really appreciate you just kind of jumping right back in. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, Madam Chair. This is Senator Bell with a quick question.
Yes, please.
Yeah, Matt, thank you. Great job. Appreciate the hard work on this. I know it's probably not a desirable time to do this job. Question, it kind of goes in line with what you said before. The people you lay off and the mothballing, et cetera, that you're doing to save cost, let's just assume on the good side, things go really well with the vaccinations and we're able to turn back quick. Is there did you all calculate a timeline for kind of turning things back on?
Not with precision, because it's so hard to. I think what we have done in the normal budget process allows us a few months before we really have to make final decisions. So if we are seeing, vaccinations becoming more widespread into January and February, we don't have to adopt this budget until mid-March. And then it goes into effect in July, and then we can begin essentially tweaking it almost immediately if we need to. And in fact, for fiscal 21, that's what happened. If you think about the time frame of the budget adoption, it happened right as the pandemic was really ramping up. So we adopted a budget and then almost immediately suspended a bunch of things in that budget, including some of the fare changes that we were going to make, and then ended up deciding to keep those changes in place, but revisited them every couple months, including recently, a few weeks ago. And so I would anticipate something similar happening here. First of all, do things change between now and when we actually have to adopt the budget, number one? And then number two, even from the time that the budget's adopted, if circumstances on the ground change, then the Metro Board would just keep running amendments to the budget and adding back in pieces as we could. But like I said, I think it's safe to assume a 30 to 60 day lag time, just in terms of trying to ramp up operations, because there are various rules related to when lines go out to bid and when schedules are set and the employees are given a certain amount of time. Again, something that's bargained, in their ability to do that. So we can't just do it. There's going to be a time period. And then obviously that furlough layoff discussion, I think it would probably, I don't want to speak for anybody, but obviously if we don't have to lay people off, we could furlough them instead. That would be preferable. That's not currently an option in our agreement, but that's another thing that's on the table for a discussion.
Thank you.
Matt, this is James Walkinshaw from Fairfax County. Thank you for what you're doing. I won't ask what happened to your eye, but clearly between that and Paul's knife incident, Metro is a real tough gig. Just one, Senator Bell kind of asked the question I was going to ask, but just one plea. I have constituents, and I'm sure others do too, who fear that, to understand the situation Metro's in now and understand the need to reduce bus routes because of the pandemic, but fear that these cuts that are due to the pandemic, which hopefully has been longer than we would have liked, but hopefully will be temporary, will turn into permanent elimination of their routes. So my hope and my request is that when you see the light at the end of this tunnel, whether that's federal stimulus or ridership coming back, that you all will start back from square one and look at the bus routes pre-pandemic, rather than starting from the routes that have been cut and thinking about adding some back. That's my only request, but thank you for your work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I will say there has been a good amount of dialogue facilitated by the excellent NVTC staff with the jurisdictional staffs on these route changes. Now, obviously, for 22, we haven't gotten into that yet, but we did obviously have to make changes in 21. And we got very good input from the jurisdictional staffs about exactly what was happening with ridership on the ground, what they were saying. And so I certainly anticipate having that type of collaborative approach to adding things back as soon as we can so that we're serving the areas that really need it.
Madam Chair, Supervisor Fast, Matt, and thank you so much for the time and effort that you're putting into this. So much, I appreciate it so much. I have a question. I want to understand a little better the silver line comment that you made. First of all, when's the budget assume that the silver line will begin operation? And is it being treated the same as the other lines in terms of 30-minute headways? And are there other lines that are being halted midway, like the silver line? And if not, why the silver line?
So I believe that the budget assumption is that the silver line phase 2 would be operating at the beginning of the fiscal year, which is fairly consistent with what we're seeing on the construction project side at this point. That is obviously subject to change for factors that have nothing to do with the budget, but there could be some delay there. But at the moment, that's the assumption that's being made. So the yellow line is also seeing service that would stop at Mount Vernon Square and not continue. But no, the other lines are not seeing that level of interruption, I would say. And I don't have an answer as to why the silver line is being treated that way. Obviously, this is the general manager's proposal, not mine. I agree that is potentially an issue. I mean, I assume their argument will be that it's new service, and so ridership won't have been as established at that point, because we won't have started it yet. But I think that's a concern for sure.
Thank you very much, and thank you for looking out for that. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Supervisor. Other questions? Supervisor Palchik?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And Matt, thank you for your time. And I think you've shown us all to stay away from WMATA board. I guess I have a question that hasn't been asked, and you might not be there yet, is comparatively. So it does sound like, number one, 8 remaining bus routes and the silver line seem to be pretty steep cuts on the Virginia side. So I know you and Paul are there advocating on the Virginia side and maybe tonight, you're not able to do that, to really get a better sense of comparatively how both of those cuts together compared to, our funding and support for Metro based on the comparison to Maryland and DC. And then I guess my other question would just be, as we look at the different phases of vaccine and who's going to be receiving those vaccines, and knowing some of those the first ones looks like will likely be healthcare workers and essential workers. Is WMATA looking at some kinds of incentives and other ways to encourage those the first phases, especially 1 and 2, to be able to get back on Metro and bus again?
So your first question, I think, kind of speaks to, I was sort of referring to it as equity, not just in terms of who we're serving, but also the level of service that Virginia is receiving versus the other 2 jurisdictions. I do have a concern about that. With this, number one, because, rail is so significantly impacted. And then number 2, the assumption on a lot of these bus routes. Now, again, I think, there were a number of factors that have gone into this. And I think when we start looking at data, we will find that Metro largely was trying to keep the routes that had the highest service, the highest volume of service, the highest passengers. And a lot of those, frankly, are just not in Virginia. They're in the district in Maryland, particularly in the district. So that is, I'm sure, a factor into what they've decided to do here. But I think there is this discussion that we're going to have as a board. And it's difficult because you have the 3 jurisdictions plus the federal government. Everybody comes in, and wants to represent their jurisdiction. Any one jurisdiction can veto something. So there has to be agreement. And so it is a tricky, sometimes tightrope that we have to walk. And then particularly the chairman, Mr. Smedberg, does a great job of trying to manage that as best he can. In terms of incentives, there's been no discussion about anything like that the board has had with staff at this point. Now, of course, again, we're just starting this. I think, we have discussed, just kind of some of us outside of the process, is there anything in terms of fair policy that we would want to look at for this year? It's kind of difficult to do that. Normally, I've been a big advocate, for instance, of like a family pass being available for rail. So that you could have, a family of 4 or 6 get on the train and not have to spend $4 a person to do it, because I think that just drives people to want to drive instead of. But most of that type of traffic is on the weekend. If we're not even going to have weekend service, then that's a whole other issue. I think what you raise is something that could potentially be part of some sort of incentive, a fair policy decision. I don't know how difficult that would be to sort of administer, but obviously, from a marketing standpoint, we already have great relationships with some of these employers, hospitals, and so on. And I think we need to be there for them. So hopefully, the more there's no evidence that folks are getting COVID on Metro or any other transit system already. And if you think about who's riding, it is some of those essential workers who are potentially at the highest risk, and yet there's still no evidence of that happening. So that's good, and hopefully those workers will want to use Metro.
Madam Chair?
Yes, please, Mr. Frangi.
Thanks, Matt, for all your work. On the essential workers piece, we mentioned the number of bus lines. There's also, dozens in some cases, but many, many variations on each line. So, that occurs to me as we consider Virginia bus service. And so I just wanted 67 route variations on 26 lines is what our staff has shared with me. And I think that's a relevant point. And
it is. Yeah.
So and I have certainly you'd have thoughts. I do have a question. We all have federal employees, and many of us have been or are, fewer are, but many of us have been federal employees. We want to value that. It strikes me that if the federal government isn't stepping forward with one of these packages, it seems relevant to make clear the costs. And when you look at the places where we don't have rail stations that would be open, in addition to the bus cuts, I just want to sort of see if that has come up in the thinking. I know we want to be serious about what the greatest needs are, but I also feel as though the gravity of the situation really should be brought home to members of Congress. And I don't know if that's come up.
So I think, one of the reasons for this very public discussion we've had during the course of this week is what you just mentioned. So Metro, when we have our meetings, we typically, the meeting materials will get posted at some point during the day, a few days before, and enterprising reporters will find our materials and maybe ask some questions and maybe start writing about them. We didn't do that for this meeting. We knew obviously the gravity of what was going to be proposed. And so the chairman and the general manager had a news conference. We one or either called jurisdictional leaders from every one of our jurisdictions, had briefings to each member of the congressional delegation, specifically, really as this news was coming out, because we wanted to send a very strong message to the federal government in particular of how great these impacts would be. And this is a serious proposal. These aren't made up numbers. This isn't a threat. I've seen, some of the Twitter chatter is, if you read Twitter on Metro, it's quite the rabbit hole. But some of the comments are, oh, this is, Metro's just threatening, so that they can get more money. No, this is a real budget proposal, and this is what it would really look like. But at the same time, we want it to be very clear to people, particularly the federal government, what this actually looks like. And the reality is the federal workforce relies on Metro, and the federal government really cannot function at its full strength without a vibrant Metro system to be able to move those federal workers. And so we absolutely think that, you know, they have a stake in this. They've never provided operating funds to Metro, only capital, and that's always been a sore spot for me. But I think particularly now with us at this level of need, whether it's members of Congress whose staff use Metro or all of the agencies, you know, where we really need them to understand that if they want to be able to operate, we're gonna need some money from them in order to keep the system running. So we're definitely thinking alike there.
Sounds great. And I wonder if going forward, that might be an additional argument with respect to Virginia and the service, the Ballston, on the Silver Line, and the essential workers that need, you know, it seems like it was covered to this point, but going forward, just a thought for you guys as you do the work.
Thank you. Mr. Snyder.
So, thanks, I think.
You can say thanks. Matt maybe feels less thanks because he knows you're going to ask the tough questions.
Thanks for trying to work through this. I guess as I look at the current proposal, and I know you have to put it out there, you got to begin somewhere, and you really have to start from the ground up, which is pretty much what you've done. The cuts are all very, very yes or no. We're going to totally close 19 stations. We're going to totally eliminate weekend service. We're going to totally cut these bus lines. To me, and I understand that's where we need to be for a lot of reasons right now. You have a number you need to reach based upon the time available, based upon where we are right now. But frankly, I think there's a lot of fine tuning that has to be done here, even assuming even assuming the scenario, even assuming a really bad scenario where the Feds stay out certainly through mid-year next year and probably beyond that. I think a lot of the private sector, frankly, is not coming back in the office. And those that do, it's going to be significantly delayed, vaccine or no vaccine. So I appreciate the reality that you have to deal with and that you're grappling with it. But I will say that just taking a quick look at it, there's a lot more sort of give and take that can be done within the scenario that you're projecting and then with the numbers that you have to reach. So I'm hoping that we'll have the opportunity to input and that the board can help us with that. I think totally shutting down 19 stations is a really bad idea. I think 30-minute headways are basically, at that point, you hardly have a system at all. A 20-minute headway might be something different. Certain stations open during the week and not during the weekend might make sense. So it's that kind of fine tuning that A, is it possible, and B, what's the process for that and what can we do to help you, assuming the parameters of right now, what we have to do, assuming we're not going to get significant federal aid, and assuming your other assumptions are in place. What's the process for advising and sort of doing this kind of mixing and matching to better serve essential workers than the initial proposal, keeping the closed stations open at least for part of the time when they might most be used? So those are just examples of some of the fine tuning that I think we're going to have to do.
Yeah, I think what's going to be very helpful is a more detailed line by line of what savings are associated with each action, which right now I don't have. So, you know, as I mentioned, like for instance, with the subway stations that are closing or the metro stations that are closing, I don't know what that number is within the total rail number of what that savings is. And I certainly don't know what it is for each individual station and then what it would be. So those are all questions that we're going to have to submit and ask. I do think there'll be quite a bit more background material provided to the board beyond just this initial discussion. But in order to be able to do that type of, sort of trading off, you need to have those baseline numbers so you understand what the actual impacts are. And, for 21, we didn't do a ton of it, but we did do some of it. And we were able to get specific numbers on each route and be able to work through some routes that we would be able to add back in. I think in this case, they didn't give us any room to play with this proposal. So anything that goes out, we have to make up. Anything we put back in, we have to make up somewhere else. And so our questions are going to have to be more expansive, because we're going to have to be asking not only what costs are of things that are proposed right now to be cut, but also potentially some other costs associated with things that aren't in this proposal that could potentially be swapped. So I think, I do anticipate that will happen. There's going to have to be a pretty extensive question and answer process with the Metro Board, but they've given us time to do that through the month of December, through the whole month of January, as we're potentially getting different revenue numbers and ridership numbers and things like that. So, Andrew is really key from NVTC on our staff as kind of being the focal point. I think the jurisdictional staff will have their own questions similar to those that you just raised, Mr. Snyder. We've talked, Andrew and I talked today about consolidating all those things, getting them up to the board members, and allowing us to just go forth with these sort of questions and just going in waves and getting as much information as we can as we try to formulate things. So, but I agree with you. I think there will have to be fine tuning to what this is. And I don't think the general manager ever really intended it for it to be, this is the proposal, this is going to be the budget, no matter what. I think he's showing what has to happen from from an order of magnitude, but it's going to be up to the board to try to work out those details and do what we can.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I see Mr. Meyer next. Is that right?
Yes, if that's okay.
Please.
Mr. Letourneau, first off, I want also say thank you for the work that you're doing in this very difficult situation. I want to make a comment about the transfer of the maintenance costs from the operating budget to the capital budget. I understand the decision. I probably would make the same decision if I were in your situation. However, I want to register my long-term concerns, and this is for FY22, 23, 24, 25. It's going to be very hard to put the genie back in the bottle. And what you have is a false sense of savings, and by doing this, it's going to delay the capital improvements program possibly forever. It could create a systemic, long-term, brick around the ankle kind of scenario in the out years. And the whole effort to refurbish this system, to position it for the next 40 years and to improve safety was all about ensuring that the capital improvements funds were sequestered and used for that. And I just want to register my concern on that. It's stating the obvious, but it's going to be very, very difficult in the post-pandemic era. And we will get to a post-pandemic era within the next 2 years, at least probably 80 or 90%, that it's just going to be very, very difficult. And I'm very concerned about the long-term implications of that. I'm not, when I make that comment, I am not in any way criticizing the decision matrix that you went through. I just, it's very troublesome to me. And
and just to be clear, so what I walked you through was the general manager's recommendation. It's not a decision that's been made yet by the Metro Board. This is what he's proposed, similar to what your city manager or county manager proposes to you. So that's the staff recommendation. I agree with what you just said, and I think I led with, I think this is the thing that's not getting enough attention in this discussion, because what it basically does is it adds somewhere between 10 to 12 million in annual debt service costs just to sort of pay for preventive maintenance. and it reduces your overall capital program capability by a couple $100 million over a period of time when you start using up debt capacity for this purpose. So I would like to avoid doing this as much as possible. Metro has gotten itself in this position before of having to do it. I'm sure there were reasons for it at those times as well, just like there is now. What staff will say, and the reason why they are recommending it is because, number one, it avoids another $160 million of service cuts, and number two, they are able to keep the state of good repair capital projects ongoing and funded throughout this. So it's only, there's not right now, there's not an actual reduction of the work that's being done right now to sort of rebuild the system. But I completely agree that it's not a sustainable approach. It's not something I would ever want to see us do for more than 1 year. And I have real concerns about even that because of those issues on debt capacity. So you're right.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate you letting me speak to it.
I think Mr. Alcorn, were you next with a question there?
I did have a question. Thank you, Madam Chairman. And Matt, a personal thank you for doing this, which I think you understand, as your alternate. Thank you for doing this. A question hasn't come up yet. FY21, I think we're assuming modest growth in ridership through FY21. And I guess, has there been any discussion? I mean, do we have any room in the budget if we don't see that? Because I am worried that things in the pandemic may get a little worse before they get better.
Yeah, I think for 21, one of the positives that we've seen, and you may have seen it in Fairfax County with your government, I saw it in Loudoun as we're getting numbers now, is the staff has been able to save money at rates that were greater than what was anticipated originally. There's just internal management cost savings that's taken place, and that has given, even in the 21 scenario, we reduced the amount that we had to cut. And then, of course, I didn't say it, but all of those cuts in 21 are being carried over to 22 as part of this. So this is really 450 on top of like 160 or whatever it ended up being. But so I think because of that, there's a little bit of room. That said, the 21 numbers were assuming really low ridership. So, ridership is pretty much at the level we're really seeing. And I'm not too worried about that, but I think it's a fair point.
That's good to hear. Thank you, Matt. And just my last comment is, I know that the cuts are pretty shocking for a lot of folks, but Matt, I think we're talking about what a 25% reduction from pre-pandemic budget levels in terms of revenue. So, I think no matter how this gets sliced, and I agree with a lot of what's said, we're looking at a horrible situation.
It really is.
22. So thank you.
I've been sort of grimly using the perhaps nonsensical analogy that not only is everyone's ox getting gored, there aren't even any oxen left to trade in this budget. So I think grim, no matter how you slice it, is about right. Okay, other questions? Oh,
This
Delegate Krizek, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to, if you could go over quickly again, the actual personnel that are being laid off. How many of them are not? Actually, a couple questions. What percentage of the workforce is it that's being laid off, and how many of them are not being given early retirement or any other kind of benefits, and they're just being kind of cut loose? And the reason I'm asking these questions is I know you guys are going to look into this, and I just want to reinforce it because I know that you feel the same way, really. But that is, are we kind of cutting off our nose to spite our face if we lose this experience and expertise and trained individuals, and then try to bring them back on a year later and have to find all new people or a lot of new people? And of course, there's the other. It's not good for our economy to have to be laying a lot of people off anyway. That has other deleterious effects. But anyway, if you would just briefly explain that, because I wasn't sure exactly what those numbers were. Thanks.
Yeah, and I don't have a lot of those with me. I think, so the overall number of layoffs were a total of 2,400 proposed for FY 22. I think the workforce is somewhere around 12,000. Greg maybe can chime in and correct me, but I think that's about where it is. So the early retirement is something that's just being rolled out. This is a sort of a new incentive, so we don't know yet what the take rate is going to be on that. In terms of these layoffs, there is a process, again, part of the bargaining that will be followed. And so I can't speak to it in detail, but I don't believe it's simply, a harsh turning off the spigot. I think there's a process there that they have to go through, but we can definitely, come back to you with some of those details. And Greg, if you're on and you have any more of that information, please feel free to chime in.
This is Greg from Metro. Yeah, you had it right. We have around 12,000 employees. So what you said was correct. And 22, it's proposed that there would be 2,400 positions that would be reduced. And that's on top of FY 21 when there was 1,000 positions as well. So
about 1,000. Okay.
Roughly 25% of the workforce.
With some of the 21 positions, they were vacant. And so a sizable number, I think it was close to maybe 40% of them were vacant at the time. They essentially cut the vacant positions instead of having to actually lay people off. Budget, in their budget, it's a savings. But and there's always going to be a certain amount of vacancy savings that occurs in any large organization. And I think unfortunately, looking at 22, that's not going to be the case because we've already sort of done that. So those are real individuals who would lose their job, and that is a very sobering thing. So yeah.
Okay. All right. I think I'm not seeing any additional hands. We're not entirely leaving the topic of WMATA. I'm going to go to the report of our WMATA committee. So if anybody has more questions on the budget piece, we'll have a little more room for that too. But Mr. Vice Chairman, would you like to give us a report from the WMATA committee?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a little hard to follow up with a bit of a grim report that we're receiving, but we're all aware of the pretty dire effects of the COVID-19 situation that we're living currently. So the WMATA committee was previously scheduled to meet virtually in December, but we decided to move the meeting to Thursday, January 21st at 6 p.m. Where we'll be better able to review the WMATA General Manager and CEO's proposed FY22 budget, which we've kind of been discussing right now. But hopefully there'll be some more details for us to kind of fill in and take a look at. We will also go over any comments to be relayed to the full commission for approval at the February commission meeting. Tonight, though, we will seek the commission's approval of the 2020 report on the performance and condition of WMATA, which is due to the governor and the General Assembly by December 15th. The commission received a presentation last month, and we heard general support for the recommended strategies, which include communicating and encouraging a safe return to transit. As Mr. Letourneau had noted, we have a lot of advertising that's going around showing the safety precautions that we're taking and that other folks have also mentioned tonight. Also adapting rail service to meet changing demands, leveraging regional expertise to improve Northern Virginia's bus network, what's gonna remain of it, right? And continuing to focus on ongoing initiatives to reduce the growth in operating costs and improve operational efficiencies. So tonight's meeting materials include a full draft of said report and a friendly reminder, this is an annual report, and with direction from the WMATA committee, staff will begin to draft next year's report in the spring of 2021, but happy to take any questions on that.
Thank you. That is great context. Probably can't be said enough that this is the fiscal 20 report. So if it feels like we're recommending rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, it's because we were in a very different place in fiscal 20. And so I think our staff, with the support of the WMATA committee, have done a really nice job of summarizing and discharging our duties as assigned to us by the General Assembly to report each year. Okay, so questions for the WMATA committee or questions about that fiscal 20 report? Okay, seeing none, Mr. Aguirre, would you want to move adoption of that report?
I would. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move to adopt the 2020 report on performance and condition of WMATA.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. McKay. Great. All right. Any further discussion? Hearing none, let me turn it to our Commission Secretary to please call the roll for a vote.
Chair Crystal.
Aye.
Gary.
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn.
Aye.
Mr. Bell.
Aye.
Ms. Bennett Parker.
Aye.
Mr. De Ferrenti.
Aye.
Mr. Eben.
Aye.
Ms. Filler-Korn.
Aye.
Mr. Faust.
Aye.
Ms. Garvey.
Aye.
Mr. Krizik.
Aye.
Mr. Letourneau.
Aye.
Mr. McKay.
Aye.
Mr. Meyer.
Aye.
Ms. Pelchik.
Aye.
Mr. Reed.
Aye.
Mr. Snyder.
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan.
Aye.
Mr. Turner.
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw.
Aye.
Ms. Mitchell.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Thank you very much. Okay. Well, thank you again to our WMATA committee, and a big thank you to Ms. Letourneau and in absentia, Mr. Smedberg as well for your work on behalf of the Commonwealth and our localities. Okay. Unless there are any final thoughts, comments, and questions that have occurred to anyone on Metro, we're going to move into the transit technology update. Actually, hopefully a good news story, at least an update on an area that has been important to us when it comes to regional multimodal transportation, I guess, different forms of rail anyway, which is the Regional Fare Collection Strategic Plan. So let me turn it over to Ms. Matthijs to introduce our staff person, Patricia Happ, who's been the lead on this. So Kate, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So indeed, we have the proposed 2021 Northern Virginia Regional Fare Collection Strategic Plan. And what this document does, it articulates NVTC's vision for an enhanced regionally integrated fare collection system. But it also identifies ways in which NVTC is helping and leading our regional transit operators in this space with a lot of coordination. And so what Patricia's going to do is give an overview of what's being proposed in that space and seek your feedback so that we can get action on this at our January meeting. So Patricia, she's been our lead for this effort and has really worked tirelessly for many months with our regional transit providers on a whole bunch of different things related to fare technology since we did our first strategic plan in 2018. And so, again, as I was saying, moving forward, this plan is going to address new challenges and basically maintaining the scale to good repair of a lot of our fare collection technologies while also modernizing. So I'm going to hand it over to Patricia, who's going to walk you through the strategic plan. And so go for it, Patricia.
Great. Thanks very much, Kate. So I'll just launch right into the strategic plan. Next slide, please. So first of all, just to tell you a little bit about the strategic planning process, we began about 6 months ago, and NVTC was supported in working through this plan by our regional partners. So we had a lot of great input from regional partners, and as well as a consulting team, which was supported by a DRPT technical assistance grant. And what the strategic plan does is it establishes the goals and objectives and the actions for NVTC's support on all things fare collection and technology related. And so it provides a shared vision with local flexibility. And then just to reiterate that there's been a lot of changes in the region since the original strategic plan. And so we were really due for an update to really target how to assist the region in this area. So next slide, please. So a quick history of fare collection. So 1999 launched the Smart Trip era, and then by 2008, most regional partners in Northern Virginia had joined Smart Trip, and then in 2015 began the era of mobile ticketing. And you can see starting in 2018, with when NVTC, when we started our original fare collection strategic plan, it began an acceleration of innovation and projects related to reforming and improving the fare collection in the region, including WMATA completing their fare payment vision and strategy as well. And then you can see several different mobile ticketing apps during that time. Next slide, please. So to just give you an overview of what the plan looks like. So one of the main takeaways on the whole strategic planning process was that continued levels of NVTC support are required to continue to improve and enhance the fare collection system in the region. And so the plan outlines support actions and cross-cutting needs. So those support actions are also divided into, we heard from the regional partners that, we worked through the timeframes that the actions were needed, and those were calendar year 2021 or immediate needs, then near-term and long-term needs. And all of those, as each of the actions are implemented, they'll be implemented through a lens of the cross-cutting needs. So that is ensuring ease of use and improved customer experience and keeping pace with technology, customer expectations, as well as an equity lens. Next slide, please. So the end result was 13 support actions for NVTC to implement on behalf of the region. And so what I'll do is the plan, which is the draft plan, which is in the kit for your review, has detailed information about each of the support actions. But I just wanted to highlight a few of them, and then feel free to ask me questions about any of them later on. But so continuing the fare box state of good repair, as we've heard, the fare boxes are well beyond their useful life. And so this is a project to upgrade the fare boxes and keep them running. And NVTC provides a support and coordination role for that. And then supporting action B is supporting immediate mobile payment needs. So this is assisting with WMATA's rollout of the Smart Trip app in Northern Virginia. And then action D, so the new fare box procurement, this is assisting the region with assisting WMATA with their procurement of new fare boxes, so to replace those the obsolete fare boxes. And then I'll also highlight action K, which is upgrades to WMATA's back office system. So this is kind of the underlying software that keeps the whole fare payment system running. And as that is upgraded, many of the other actions become, are able to be implemented. So that one's also really important. And I'll also note that as we're working through these actions and as we move forward, the timelines are going to be revisited and evaluated to align with available funding and updates to policies. Next slide, please. So as we've already discussed in this meeting, there's a lot of challenges ahead. And, in terms of fare collection, we know that we've paused the fare collection and, we're facing a lot of challenges related to the public health emergency. But along with that, there's also an opportunity to come out of this and to move forward with a better fare payment system and to really be able to create some innovation and improvements. And, we're seeing that there's a demand for mobile and contactless or touchless technologies and multimodal trip planning, as well as modernization of the software. Next slide, please. And so just to kind of finish, before I finish out, I wanted to highlight some of the accomplishments that we as a region have been able to accomplish through the original strategic plan, the 2018 plan. So we've been able to maintain and rehab the aging fare boxes, as well as work with WMATA on a process to procure new fare boxes. We also provided input to WMATA's strategic plan for fare payment. We had app pilots and app upgrades, as well as the Smart Trip mobile app and mobile wallet. And then we've also accelerated innovation. So some of the projects that we've been able to push forward to assist the region, which are examples are the rear door payment validation, which provides social distancing for operators and riders, and then also the Smart Trip app, which is going to really help with some of those touchless and innovative ideas for fare payment. So next slide, please. So just looking forward on next steps and how we're going to, what's going to happen next. So you can, at the January meeting, we'll be seeking approval of the final plan. And then we want to make sure that the plan is serving the region and providing the best, that the actions are relevant and important to the region. So we'll be measuring progress, and we'll be reporting back to partners and working groups. And then I'll also be bringing reports back to the commission on a regular basis. And we want to be able to implement the plan, but planning to stay flexible and adapt to changes in policy, technology, and funding as we move forward. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Let me invite the commissioners to ask questions or pose them about this important body of work.
So, Madam Chair, just to
Please, Mr. DeFranti.
Mindful of a big agenda, just to thank you for the presentation. It's a tough moment to be doing this body of work, it seems to me, after with Metro, with the rest of the subjects, but it is super important. And so I engaged with Ms. Happen in a phone call, and this is relevant to work that's been ongoing in Arlington. And thank you for continuing, because a year and a half, 2-3 years from now, this will be very important. So thanks.
Yeah, and thank you for your input.
Anyone else? Okay. I think this is because we're all a little shell-shocked from the prior item and not a commentary on the great work or presentation that you've given us tonight. So thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, great. So legislative update. A couple of legislative action items before us today, including VRE's legislative agenda and, of course, our own. So Mayor Meyer, I think, is I know is our chair of the Legislative and Policy Committee, and I think he has a presentation for us. So let me turn it to you.
All right. Thank you, Chair Crystal. Last month, the Commission was presented with the NVTC's proposed 2021 legislative and policy agenda. And so tonight, the committee is asking the Commission to approve the final agenda. And as a reminder, there were 6 legislative priorities at the state level and 5 at the federal level. I'd like to just review them one more time for those who may not have been present, last month. And at the Commonwealth level, 1 is to protect the existing transit programs and funding, which is pretty obvious. 2, connecting riders to opportunity through transit. And this is really targeted on those who are vitally dependent on transit systems for their employment and economic security. 3 is to continue to support the Transforming Rail in Virginia program. restoring funding for the NVTA, preserving NVTC's stewardship of NVTC programs. You know, that's a recurring subject that comes up. We had a discussion on that last month, and I don't see that as a concern, but it is a priority for us to be ever vigilant. And lastly is to update remote public meeting requirements to enable the commission to have as much flexibility as possible. And at the federal level, reauthorizing dedicated federal funding for WMATA, obviously, continuing the support for COVID-19 transit relief for transit agencies, as we just discussed, reauthorizing the FAST Acts and Fix the Highway Trust Fund, identifying federal funding and financing for Long Bridge, and we've had a number of presentations on that, and then continuing support for the commuter tax benefits. That is really particularly important in a post-pandemic environment when we're trying to encourage and incentivize people to get back onto transit for work. And so based upon the feedback from the commission last month, this final document also includes some talking points on the importance of sustained investment in public transit, and there's some revised language regarding electronic participation that provides some flexibility to support a range of approaches that would increase the use of electronic meetings. And this is not just for the NVTC, but especially for us. So at this point, I'm going to recognize Amy and Kate to speak to any very specific last-minute changes since the last month, particularly the Joint Committee on Transit Accountability and possibly some other newest trends. Following their presentation, Chair Crystal, I would request that you entertain a motion to adopt the final agenda. Thank you. So Amy and Kate, please. Go ahead.
Sure, I can give a very brief update. There isn't actually that much that's been happening, thankfully. So we're all sort of preparing, I think, just for the next session. Obviously, just as a reminder, the General Assembly session starts this year on January 13th. And it's a short session year because we're in an odd year. And the governor's budget will come out on December 16th. So that's the first thing that will happen, which I know it's hard to imagine since they just adopted the budget about 3 weeks ago, but they're running another one. And so we'll see that on December 16th. I don't think we sort of foresee any sort of, big issues for us in that budget. So that's good. But obviously we'll keep an eye on that. Obviously, the biggest thing that we have, and obviously we have legislators here, including the speaker who can chime in as well, but this will be a different year. Everything's going to be virtual. The House will be completely virtual. The Senate will be streaming, and they're going to be meeting in person at the Science Museum like they did during special sessions. So socially distanced and apart. Again, nobody from the public being available and being down there. And so, we'll all be doing this virtually like we did during the special session. The biggest thing is that we have pretty strict bill limits this year, which has been something very different for all of us. The senators have 12 bills and the House members have 7. So I think everybody's being, really careful about the bills they choose and what they carry and not having duplicative bills on each side in the House and the Senate like they have in the past. So it'll be, it'll be an interesting year. I think, we did a good job during special session. So I think we'll be able to get through this again. And then hopefully with all the vaccines, we'll be back in person soon. So the Joint Commission on Transportation Accountability did meet today, but it wasn't anything, just a sort of more informational kind of about where we are with the overall transportation budget and a presentation from APTA on overall transit issues. So nothing came out of it that was significant for us to have to move or act on. So with that, I know we have a very busy agenda. I'll be happy to answer any questions, but that's all I've got.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, I'll just give a very, very quick update. We've talked a lot about the federal space. There's a lot of moving targets. Obviously, we're tracking what's happening in the Senate with the various bills that are going. As Matt Letourneau mentioned, there's a $908 billion COVID relief package, but indeed it's looking at about $15 billion for transit, which is very shy of what the American Public Transportation Association was asking for, which was $32 billion. But we're watching the space. There's things that are moving on. One of the things I think that's really exciting is that folks that are near and dear the U.S. Senate, of course, within the state of Virginia, is our state senators Warner and Kane, both of whom are going to be speaking on Monday at our legislative event. So there's the plug for that. So Monday morning from 9 to 11:30 is our joint legislative briefing, where we actually do have the opportunity to have both of our U.S. senators, as well as Secretary Valentine and Paul Wiedefeld, Rich Dalton, Bob Schneider, me, Monica Backman, as well as the chairs of NVTC and PRTC. So, and you can join 194 of your colleagues on the WebEx, because that's where we are with the RSVPs so far. Once again, the power of electronic, we've doubled or close to doubled how many folks we usually have. So, so we hope to get an update from our senators on that on Monday. So that's what I have for the federal space.
Great. Thanks, Kate. I think it probably makes sense to have the chair of our Legislative and Policy Committee go ahead and make that motion to approve the legislative agenda, and then we can entertain any discussion or comments both on that action item or any of the comments that we've heard from Kate or Amy. So Mayor Meyer, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Chair Crystal. I move that the Commission adopt the, entertain a motion, or I move that we adopt the final agenda. Thank you.
McKay, second.
Great, thank you. All right, that's been moved and seconded. Questions on the agenda or questions on what we've heard from Amy and Kate tonight?
For Dave Snyder, only question for the chairman of the committee, and thank you for the work, to say the least. Have we sufficiently addressed the financial situation that was described tonight in this current package? Because I know a lot of it was put together in advance of that, and the supporting information, is all that included, or can it be included? We don't need, I'm not talking about getting engaged in any sort of a drafting process at all tonight, but have we sufficiently addressed, in your view, the financial situation that's been described tonight?
Well, first off, on the Virginia, on the state level, that is our first priority. And candidly, when we talk about restoring funding for the NVTA, for example, that's realistically, we very much appreciated the funding that was partially restored last year, but the realities are that probably is going to have to be put off for another year. I think that part of this is to do no harm relative to some of the revenue streams that exist in Virginia relative to transit. And with respect to what you were making reference to in terms of WMATA, at the federal level, we are pursuing that. I think it's embedded in our policy throughout all of these items. I don't know if that's an adequate response to your question, but it's really embedded in several of these different items that I just read to you.
Madam Chair.
Please, Mr. McKay.
Yeah, if I could add on to that, I think, obviously the continued support for COVID-19 relief for transit agencies is the second item on the federal priorities. But I do think the point that Dave brings up is a good one, which is, one of the things that's great about this legislative package is kind of the simplicity to the point of it. I think what is being asked, and I could be wrong, but I certainly could support NVTC drafting, a much more specific letter dealing with the current crisis at Metro. I do think that many people acknowledge this, most particularly Matt, that our delegation gets it. But it wouldn't hurt to reinforce some of the metrics that we heard earlier tonight about the magnitude of it to them, for the purposes of them sharing that with other committee staff or some of their other colleagues on the Hill, because our audience for this is largely our delegation. And since they get the Metro stuff already, I think we could go into great detail in a letter to them, emphasizing the importance of the moment, so to speak, and then they could use that however they see appropriate. But I do think it's captured in the package the right way. But I also think, given tonight's presentation, we need to up the ante a little bit, and there may be a way to do both.
I would concur in Jeff's comments with respect to that. And it's been said, and of course, Speaker Fillercorn could probably address this more specifically, that our region provides up to 40% of the state's revenue. It's that much of an impact on the state's economy. And a key element of that economic activity is, in fact, our transit systems here in the region. So there is a direct benefit, and it's in the self-interest of other parts of the state to support these initiatives to strengthen our transit system.
Madam Chair, just for a clarifying point, Jeff, you were suggesting that this would be a letter more on the federal side, on the emphasis of the federal package. I mean, I would love to. Libby, I got you next. Yeah.
I think so, but I think the mayor just brought up a good point. We do have a lot of new members on NVTC, and it wasn't that long ago, and Kate may be able to opine better on this, but NVTC actually did an analysis of the economic benefit specifically of Metro to the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so, that's certainly a relevant point we can put in about the overall importance of Metro, and that federal funding is not just for Northern Virginia, but point of fact is a major player in the entire state's economy. In that context, we could include that in the letter. And NVTC did a lot of work not long ago, and I'm pretty sure the numbers aren't much different today than they were then in terms of the revenue that could be directly attributed to Metro's contribution to Northern Virginia's economy. And so what I'm suggesting is we draft a letter to our federal delegation about the magnitude of the Metro cuts that were presented tonight, re-emphasizing the importance of them not only to the nation, but also to Virginia specifically. If that's an element of the letter, I think that makes sense. But I do think we need to send a follow-up letter specifically based on what we heard tonight to our delegation.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent idea, and I think in some ways could be a similar strategy to the one that we deployed during the 2018 session, which was to have the focused legislative strategy and a variety of supplemental materials for case making. Let me see, but as I call on Libby, let me ask if anybody objects to that, get ready to let us know. And sure, let me give our committee chair a prerogative here, and then Libby, I promise.
I'll take Chairman McKay's comments as an amendment to the motion.
Okay, great, excellent.
And I'll
No,
and I'm just actually piling on and saying I think it's a great idea. I mean, in essence, what we want is a letter that kind of really provides targeted ammunition, I think, to get, and I really do like the idea. I think one thing that I keep remembering is how, one way to look at a region is actually going, I think it's Philadelphia down to Richmond. And if you do that, we're the 7th largest economy in the world. And the heart of that region is really right here, in around the capital. And what keeps this heart beating is our transit system. And I think people really don't, a lot of times the legislators don't really get it, that how much we depend on transit and how much the region depends on transit, and actually how much the nation, I mean, it just goes out, it all ties together. So all by way of saying, yes, let's get some really strong ammunition there and make people understand how important this region is and how important it's transit to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I know I'm preaching to the choir. Sorry.
Yeah, please, of course. Speaker Fillercorn.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I couldn't agree more. And I think you all did a fabulous job, and Kate Matisse and everybody a couple of years ago, and last year as well, a couple of years ago. It is all about education. And I think it benefited all of us. It provided us with an opportunity to really speak more effectively and eloquently when we had all the data and the facts, and we're able to really communicate that on the floor and subcommittees and full committees, and really educate the rest of our members as well. So more education always makes sense, and you all did a fabulous job before, and I think it would be beneficial now, especially in light of this horrific news and numbers that we're playing with.
Thank you. Can't imagine a better testimonial to the fact that it worked, right? It's great to hear. Would that we would be so successful with the federal government in 2021. But, okay, great. So it doesn't seem like I'm hearing any objections to that. Oh,
no objection, but Madam Chair, can I ask a question?
Please, please.
So it's actually for the speaker and others. And please understand, I'll be careful how I phrase this. We are super appreciative of what everything the Commonwealth has done so far, and in particular, DRPT really went to great lengths to provide some additional transit funding. Is it even remotely possible, or should we even bother trying to see if there's anything additional available to address this current WMATA issue? And with the caveat that anything Virginia would do would need to be matched, I think, by DC and Maryland. But is that even, understanding how difficult your budget situation is, I'm just kind of asking, since everyone's here and we're all kind of on the same team, is that even really worthwhile at this point?
I would say absolutely it's worthwhile, and we should, we'll definitely be working with you. We'll be in soon for sure.
Okay, so maybe in light of that, then, kind of similar to what Ms. Was just stated on the federal side, maybe we just want to sort of add some type of a note, at least to our cover letter, on the NVTC legislative agenda, essentially asking for help wherever we can get it, whether that's in Richmond or in Washington. Would that be amenable to the chair and others?
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes.
Excellent. Okay. All right. Well, we do have a motion on the floor to accept the legislative package. Great.
Crystal, as the seconder, I agree with both of those amendments as well.
Great. Okay. Unless there is further discussion, I'm going to go ahead and call for a vote and turn it to our secretary to do that. Ms. Gilchrist.
Chair Crystal.
Yes.
Mr. Aguirre.
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn.
Aye.
Mr. Bell.
Aye.
Ms. Bennett Parker.
Aye.
Mr. De Ferrenti.
Aye.
Mr. Evan.
Aye.
Ms. Filler-Korn.
Aye.
Mr. Faust.
Aye.
Ms. Garvey.
Aye.
Mr. Krizik.
Aye.
Mr. Letourneau.
Aye.
Mr. McKay.
Aye.
Mr. Meyer.
Aye.
Ms. Pelchik.
Aye.
Mr. Reed.
Aye.
Mr. Snyder.
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan.
Aye.
Mr. Turner.
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw.
Aye.
Ms. Mitchell.
Aye.
The motion passes. Turn it back to the chair.
Thank you. Okay, we do, as was previewed, have a block of items on VRE tonight, including the very consequential VPRA agreements. So let me welcome our CEO of the VRE, Mr. Dalton, to give a presentation and maybe preview or give some more details on each of these action items before us this evening.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just simply work my way down the list, starting with I believe with the commission orientation. And so if we could go to maybe the next slide there. So yeah, just to get started, of course, the top of this slide just briefly outlines why we're here. And tonight I will just provide a brief overview of the five topics that we have on that slide. Governance, what we are known for, operations, equipment, and VRE's future. So next slide. VRE governance. As most of you know, VRE is jointly owned by both NVTC and PRTC, and many actions from those two commissions are delegated to the VRE Operations Board through the master agreement. And then, of course, the Operations Board consists of commission members and technically the chair of the Commonwealth Transportation Board or her designee. Next slide. The commissions, albeit a lot of the day-to-day type stuff is delegated to the Operations Board. Just want to point out here that the commissions have retained the approval authority for the listed items above here, and what you're going to see in a few minutes is there's about 5 action items that to some degree touch on some of these items or on some of these authorization categories. So including the legislative agenda, of course, if we were to have, as we bring strategic plans up through the operations board, you would see those as well. And of course, the sale or purchase of real property, etc. So again, highlight that, and I think there's another document in your package that actually highlights those items as well. Next slide. What we are known for, and so I've got 5 topics up here. Although this list would probably match our own self-assessment of what we're known for, but the source of this list primarily comes from customer service or customer satisfaction surveys, peer reviews, and other means of essentially keeping tabs of how we're doing. And I'm just going to touch on the top bullet point first from a health and safety perspective. Safety is paramount, and of course, deeply rooted in all functional areas of what VRE does. We are a highly regulated operation, predominantly at the federal level, and with that comes a host of requirements and particular programs, et cetera, that we must maintain. And of course, that sets the minimum standards for us. And we pride ourselves on not just meeting those minimum standards, but of course exceeding those standards and continuing to work with our peers in the industry to expand those standards as much as we can. Customer satisfaction, quality service, reliable service. Of course, those are a lot of the feedback that we get from our customers. I will say we end up being our own worst critic when it comes to these categories here. In other words, between not just the VRE staff, but our partners are very, very vested, if you will, in the VRE operation. And that includes our host railroads, our partners at NVTC, staff members, jurisdictional staff members, PRTC staff members. All of us are collectively vested in this. And so I end on this slide with, as it relates to strong partnerships, essentially everything that we do from the customer-facing part of our business, we actually do that on assets owned by others. And so it takes those strong partnerships to enable our operation to be successful, because we have to integrate our operations into theirs in order to provide a transparent experience for our riders. Next slide. Just some quick vital type stuff from an operation standpoint. We do operate off of 2 lines, the Fredericksburg and the Manassas line is depicted off to the right in the diagram there. Of course, on the Manassas line, operating out of the southernmost terminus at Broad Run into DC at Washington Union Terminal. And then, of course, on the Fredericksburg line, the southernmost terminus is the Spotsylvania station, and again, operating into Washington, DC. During our, we could call it pre-COVID, we would operate 16 trains on both lines, and of course, out of 19 stations. And to note that 5 of those stations do connect with Metro Rail. We currently are operating at a reduced service level. So we're operating 8 trains on the Manassas line and 10 trains on the Fredericksburg line. From a staffing perspective, we have just slightly less right now, 50 VRE employees. And of course, it takes an additional 140 plus contracted service providers to operate VRE, so about 200 people a day. involved in ensuring VRE trains not only meet schedule and meet our riders' expectations, but of course do that in a safe manner. Next slide. Just wanted to point out the equipment. I know some commission members and staff members have been on VRE. Simply put, we have a total of 100 passenger rail cars and 20 locomotives. And unlike right-of-way, unlike rail, unlike some of these other assets, the equipment are assets that the commissions own. So I don't necessarily have a title, if you will, for each piece of equipment like you would with your vehicle. But this equipment are owned by the commissions. And so one of the elements that you would see, not just from a property standpoint, conveyance of property, but as we purchase additional equipment, those procurements or those authorizations would come up to you as well. Then next slide. So just wanted to touch on VRE's future. I know a lot of discussion about the current environment that frankly that we're all in, and a lot of good discussion earlier in this meeting, and similar discussions going on at our other parent commission meeting. But we like to periodically look at what we would refer to as life after COVID. And so from VRE's future standpoint, of course, and we're going to get to a couple items here in a little bit, but as it relates to the Commonwealth's transforming rail in Virginia, of course, VRE has a piece of that as well. And we are proceeding on with several passenger station improvements, platform lengthening, rehabilitation programs, etc. And just want to make a point here that at the end of the day, in order to effectively maintain the safe and reliable operation that we've become accustomed to, in order to grow in the future, etc., the Transforming Rail in Virginia program is important, if for no other reason, to just simply separate freight trains from passenger trains. And that's the ultimate goal of that program, in addition to being able to provide additional service for VRE. I will just close that. If again, meant this to be just somewhat brief and an overview. And if there's any questions, I also would like to use this a little bit as a teaser for, as we start to come out of the current environment that we're in, relative to the pandemic and stuff like that. Just continue to encourage commission members, staff members, others that if you want one of those, bird's eye peek into what VRE does out there on a day-to-day basis, please reach out to me, and we'll provide that. We'll provide that experience for you. So, Madam Chair, that's the end of that presentation.
Excellent, thank you. You know what, Mr. Dalton, just given the hour, why don't I welcome you to go ahead and give the COVID-19 response and any other reports that you have on your docket, and then we'll go to just broad questions if that's all right with you.
Okay. Okay, great. Let's the COVID report again. You have the memo and stuff in your packet, so just I can be brief with that as well. VRE continues to operate at a reduced service level, and just got a message. Hey, there we are. We're back. Again, VRE continues to operate at a reduced service level. We continue to monitor our ridership on a daily basis and prepared to add additional cars lengthen trains, even add additional trains if appropriate, in order to maintain social distancing. And of course, I keep putting a plug in for this, that the public can view the capacity of each of our train via our train utilization webpage. We continue to manage and enhance the health and safety measures that we implemented system-wide earlier in the year. For the month of November, we did see average daily ridership drop off a little bit. The month of October, we were hovering right around that 1,400 average daily ridership number. We ended up in the, I'll say the mid 1,300s for the month of November, but we did have two fewer service days in the month of November. On-time performance for the month continues to be strong at the mid 93% system-wide. Staff continues to work remotely, and of course, all of our business functions are fully operational as we continue to maintain a continuity of operations. That is the end of that report, Madam Chair.
All right. Well, thank you. I really appreciate that, Mr. Dalton. Okay, so let's pause before we move into our action items for questions for Mr. Dalton. That's really interesting to know that presentation was a result of the performance audit. It makes sense, right? You have these two parent commissions, and it helps to have the somewhat regular check-ins about the bread and butter of VRE. So thank you for that presentation. Questions for Mr. Dalton about either that 101 or the COVID-19 response and current operations?
Madam Chair, this is Delegate Cruz. A quick question. Did you say 93% of ridership is still, you still have that now?
No, Madam Chair, sir, the 93.5%, that was our on-time performance system-wide for the month of November.
Okay.
We're roughly, and again, we ticked off a little bit in the month of November. We're only we're down about 92%, frankly, from pre-COVID levels.
But you better believe those 8% of riders are getting to work on time.
Absolutely.
All right, little grim humor. Thank you for the clarification. All right, any other questions for Mr. Dalton? Okay. So without any further questions, I'm going to turn it to Elizabeth Bennett Parker, the Vice Chair of the VRE Operations Board, to tee up our action items. And again, I'll give an opportunity for any objections, but I am going to encourage us to entertain those as a block. They are disparate items, but because there are so many, I think it makes sense for us to vote at once unless there are any objections. So Ms. Bennett Parker, over to you. Elizabeth, are you still with us? Unmute, maybe?
Yes, it would definitely be helpful to unmute. My apologies. Thank you, Madam Chair. So the first item is just an update. No action is being requested tonight. The Commission will be asked to approve the revised FY21 VRE budget and the proposed FY22 budget at our January meeting. The key VRE budget assumptions and projections initially presented as part of the preliminary FY22 budget have not changed. Daily ridership and passenger revenue have remained steady at reduced levels throughout the fall. Federal CARES Act funding remains available to backstop lost passenger revenue and support VRE operations through FY22. The ongoing pandemic, however, will require deviations from normal budget adoption processes, including the allocation of jurisdictional subsidy based on the previous year's budget rather than the results of the master agreement survey we normally do in the fall. The first action item is Resolution 2427 to accept and authorize distribution of VRE's FY20 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. The FY20 audit was conducted by the firm of Peter Mayers, the auditor for VRE, PRTC, and NVTC. We reviewed the statements and presented, the Peter Mayers did, to the VRE Audit Committee prior to our November Operations Board meeting. The audit opinion letter states that the VRE statements in all material respects fairly and accurately present the financial position of the organization, which is the best outcome of a financial audit. The second action item is to approve the 21 VRE legislative agenda. At our November meeting, the Operations Board amended the legislative agenda to add language under the meetings held through electronic communications means section of the state legislative agenda to support removing the state limit on how often members may participate electronically when there is a physical quorum present, while retaining VRE's authority to govern such participation with additional guidelines or restrictions. The next action item is Resolution 2429. This was deferred from the November meeting, and the Commission is being asked to approve authorizing the VRE CEO to execute an agreement with the City of Manassas Park for the design, construction, operation, and maintenance of a parking garage at the VRE Manassas Park Station, as well as authorize the VRE CEO to execute all deeds and other documents required to accept the conveyance of real property by the city to the commissions. Since the last meeting, VRE and the City of Manassas Park staff have worked through final contract language to collaboratively address the city's request to have the ability to reacquire their garage parcel used for the construction of the parking garage in the event VRE service at the Manassas Park Station is discontinued. VRE and city staff are proposing a ground lease of the garage parcel and other requirements of the city in the event VRE service is discontinued. Prior to soliciting for construction of the parking garage, staff will bring to the VRE Operations Board a recommendation to the commissions for authorization of a ground lease with the City of Manassas Park. The next two actions are agreements with the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority that were referenced earlier. I'm going to introduce the two actions and then ask Mr. Dalton to again speak to the two agreements. Commissioners received final red line versions of these by email yesterday. So the first is Resolution 2430, which will authorize the VRE CEO to execute an agreement with the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, or alternatively DRPT, for later assignment to the VPRA for passenger rail operations and access. Passenger Rail Operations and Access Agreement includes provisions to enable VRE trains to operate on right-of-way acquired by the Commonwealth of Virginia from CSX Transportation, to provide the right for VRE to manage VRE station facilities located in the right-of-way, and to increase VRE service once planned improvements within the railroad corridor are completed. It's anticipated that the agreement will be executed with DRPT and later assigned to the VPRA when practical. Finally, the Commission is being asked to approve Resolution 2431, which will authorize the VRE CEO to execute an agreement with the Passenger Rail Authority, or alternatively DRPT, for later assignment to the Rail Authority for passenger rail improvements and funding. The Rail Improvements and Funding Agreement includes provisions for the two commissions to fund a portion of the planned improvements and the purchase of real property for right-of-way acquired by the Commonwealth from CSX. The commissions will utilize commuter rail operating and capital funds for both a debt issuance and on a pay-as-you-go basis as the source of the funding commitment. Once complete, the planned improvements will allow a significant increase in VRE service in accordance with the term of the separate operating access agreement. And finally, it's anticipated that agreement will be executed with DRPT and later assigned to the Passenger Rail Authority when practical. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Dalton to speak further to those agreements.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So we did provide some information via an information item last month to the commission. So let me just touch on a couple of key points here. And again, just want from a visual standpoint, particularly in the right-of-way, as it relates to the VRE service area. If you note at the bottom of the diagram, there's a Spotsylvania station. And of course, that follows north all the way up to and into Washington Union Terminal. The way you can kind of look at the right-of-way acquisition is essentially the right-of-way is going to get split longitudinally in half. The red line would indicate the right-of-way that the Commonwealth will acquire from CSX. And if you follow that diagram up a little bit, highlighted the Franconia bypass just above the Lorton station. That the purpose of that bypass is essentially to shift rail traffic to the west side of the right of way prior to Franconia Springfield station, and essentially line up VRE and other and Amtrak essentially into Alexandria, Crystal City, and LaFont prior to going into Washington Terminal. So I just wanted to make sure there was a visual here as it relates to the right-of-way acquisition. Next slide. I'll just briefly touch down through some of these, and if some of you are catching the background noise, hopefully it's not too disturbing. But I do have a freight train right outside my window here, so I'll try to overcome that if that's bothering me. Again, from an operation standpoint, speaking of freight trains, CSX will continue to operate and dispatch and maintain the corridor. And again, as I mentioned in the previous presentation, the ultimate goal here is freight and passenger separation. But we got to walk before we can run. And so part of the agreement, this agreement, of course, will, lists out not only, a proposed timeline, but what some of those planned improvements are to eventually get to that point in the future in terms of infrastructure improvements. And of course, some of those planned improvements include the new Long Bridge, the Franconia bypass that we mentioned there, and of course, several third and fourth track projects as well. And I know I kind of skipped down there a little bit. The bullet point on passenger station facility lease, in the agreement, we do identify essentially the current VRE station locations in that lease agreement, similar to our existing access agreements with both CSX and Norfolk Southern. The agreement essentially identifies what that footprint looks like in the right of way. The key part with this agreement is that the rail authority, there's some provisions in there. We'll start off with essentially a lease rate of about $1 a year, a nominal rate of $1 a year on those locations, and then of course the other point in that agreement, or in the lease part of the agreement, does provide a process from which, when VRE continues to expand platforms and does other modifications, that we have a way to identify that in the agreement. Planned additional services, of course, one of the major elements, essentially would be argued that it's the whole reason why we're doing transforming rail in Virginia is for the additional service. I would say too that it also helps with the reliability of our current service. But the agreement does identify what the proposed planned additional services. That's all phased in, and over a period of time identified as phase 1, phase 2, and eventually phase 3 and phase 4. And now that I have a freight train out of my ear, I could probably get back on track here a little bit. I apologize for that. One thing in the planned additional service that I will bring up is that as that planned additional service comes online, there's provisions in the agreement that in the event that VRE or the commissions aren't able to provide, at least in the short term, maybe the planned additional service, and there's a provision in there where the rail authority, could take those train slots and use them for other service. It's not in perpetuity. In other words, we don't lose train slots forever, but just wanted to emphasize that to the commission that, the objective here is to obviously add service in the future. And of course, the Commonwealth and their investment as well want to make sure that all concerned, we do have the ability, if you will, to add that planned additional service. And then just from the indemnity liability default provisions, very similar to what we have in existing access agreements. I do want to highlight that consistent with other access agreements from the from the insurance provision standpoint, this agreement also has, and some of you are familiar with our current insurance plan that's effectively managed by the Department of Risk Management for the Commonwealth. So all that essentially stays the same. Next slide. Go to the next slide. So we'll go to the next agreement, the rail improvement agreement, and we do have our Chief Financial Officer, Mark Schofield, who's championed this agreement. So he's likely to be in a slightly quieter place. So therefore, I will hand over to Mark. He'll just give you some highlights and of course, answer any questions that you may have. So with that, Mr. Schofield, thank you.
Thank you, Rich, and good evening, Commission members. We have had pretty broad agreement with the Commonwealth on the basic structure of this funding agreement for about a year now. And as Ms. Bennett-Parker said, the agreement is a combination of a one-time debt issuance and then cash or pay-go contributions. And so the challenge over the last few months has been to develop an agreement that on the one hand makes a firm commitment that we will participate in funding the Commonwealth's rail program, while at the same time leaving as much flexibility as possible to structure that debt issuance in an advantageous way, given that we don't know what the market conditions will look like roughly a year from now. So I would ask you to think of this commitment that VRE is making as happening over about a 30-year period, but in two distinct chunks of time. There's the first 10 years, and then there's the last 20 years. And so during the first 10 years, VRE receives, as you know, $15 million a year in CROC funding. So during that first 10 years, all $15 million will go towards the Commonwealth's rail program, either as debt service or as cash or pay-go. The debt service each year might be as low as $7.5 million. It might be as high as $9.9 million, which is the statutory maximum amount of CROC that we can commit to debt. That number isn't determined yet, and it will depend on how we ultimately structure the debt issuance, but we want to work to maximize the proceeds that will be available from the debt issuance in order to support the right-of-way purchase that the Commonwealth is going to make. And so then whatever portion of that $15 million each year that is not going towards the debt service is left over, that will go as cash towards three major planned capital investment projects that are happening in VRE's territory: the Long Bridge, the fourth track in Alexandria, and then the Springfield bypass. So that's the first 10 years. And then for years 11 and onward, the debt service, whatever debt we've incurred, the service on that will continue. It will not be more than $7.5 million or half of our CROC. The other half, the other $7.5 million, will revert back to VRE and will be available for us to use however we decide is best. But most likely, we will use it to expand our service. And so the timing of that 10-year length of time is very intentional. That is roughly when we expect the new Long Bridge to open, and by removing that bottleneck, then we will be in a position to really add that additional service that we've been wanting to add. As far as the timeline for this, as I indicated, the goal would be to have this debt issuance happen about 12 months from now, maybe a little bit less. But we would expect to come back to the Operations Board and to the commissions at least two more times before then with respect to the agreement. So one, we need to update our debt management policies. We originally adopted those back in 2013. but those did not contemplate a debt issuance like this. So we do need to modify those. And then we will come back and get a formal approval from the commissions on a detailed debt issuance plan once we have done all the financial analysis that we need to do, all the legal due diligence, all of that sort of detailed work that's going to happen over the coming months. We will come back and present that to you as the commissions. So this is your first bite at the apple on this, but not your last one. And so with that, Rich, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thanks, Mark. I don't have anything to add, and I think we were down to the bottom of the list there. So I think I'll turn it back over to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for that extensive presentation. I think a lot of interesting implications for us in the Commission as one of the parent entities of VRE. So certainly a seismic time for the future of commuter rail and passenger rail in general. And I believe that we have on hand for questions not only Mr. Dalton and our CFO, Mr. Schofield, but also I think legal counsel Steve McIsaac, who was with us, legal counsel to both VRE and NVTC, if we have any questions about the specifics of the negotiated agreement, and of course our partners at DRPT. We're very involved, of course, in the future of the Passenger Rail Authority and passenger rail in general, all on hand to answer questions should commissioners have any. And let me open the floor now.
Madam Chair.
Please, Mr. Snyder.
Sure, thanks. This is really a question for Steve McIsaac. Steve, you've looked at, I presume, both the agreement and the funding package. So based upon the very intensive work that NVTA did in establishing itself and issuing debt, what is the ultimate liability for any debt that is issued by VRE? Is it ultimately this authority, this commission, and then the individual members of the commission ultimately? What is the ultimate responsibility for any debt issuance by VRE?
Madam Chair, Mr. Snyder, in a word, there is no liability. You have none. There is no recourse against any of the member jurisdictions, either at PRTC or NVTC, for any of the debt that is issued back by CROC. In fact, the only real funds that are going to be pledged to support this is the CROC funds itself, which are going to be subject to appropriation, of course, by the Commonwealth itself. And then, of course, we have to have the funds in place to actually make the debt service payments. As Mr. Schofield can articulate, we will have a debt service reserve to protect shortfalls in the event, there is a failure to have sufficient funds to make debt service payments. But in no instance is the full faith and credit of any of the jurisdictions pledged to support any of the debt.
And I would appreciate that in the minutes of the meeting that question and the answer be reflected. I think that's something that may be very important in the future. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Snyder. I think that's something that should be accommodated. Other questions about the financial arrangement or the rail operating arrangement? Okay. All right, well, seeing none, I would like to entertain a motion to approve Resolution 2427, which is the distribution of the CAFR for VRE, Resolution 2428, which is the VRE legislative agenda, Resolution 2429, which is the Manassas Park Agreement for the parking garage at the Manassas Park VRE station, Resolution 2430, which is to authorize the CEO to execute the agreement with the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, and Resolution 2431, which authorizes the VRE CEO to execute an agreement with VPRA for passenger rail improvements and funding.
So moved.
Thank you very much, Mr. DeFerenti. Is there a second?
Second.
Great, I'll give it to Ms. Bennett Parker there. Okay, any questions, discussion, or is there anyone who wishes to pull out one of these items and not vote on them as a block? Okay, hearing none, let me turn it to our secretary, Ms. Gilchrist, to please call the roll.
Chair Crystal.
Aye.
Mr. Gary.
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn.
Aye.
Mr. Bell.
Aye.
Ms. Bennett Parker.
Aye.
Mr. DeFerenti.
Aye.
Mr. Eben.
Aye.
Ms. Filler Korn.
Aye.
Mr. Faust.
Aye.
Ms. Garvey.
Aye.
Mr. Krizik.
Aye.
Mr. Letourneau.
Aye.
Mr. McKay.
Aye.
Mr. Meyer.
Aye.
Ms. Pelchik. Mr. Reed.
Aye.
Mr. Snyder.
Abstain.
Mr. Sullivan.
Aye.
Mr. Turner.
Aye.
Mr. Walkinshaw.
Aye.
Ms. Mitchell.
As the counter signatory of two of those agreements, I am going to have to abstain.
The motion passes.
Thank you very much. Well, Ms. Mitchell, I think I know VRE and I suspect most of this commission looks forward to this next chapter of passenger rail in the Commonwealth and the region in partnership with you. And a sincere thanks really to the team from VRE, Mr. Dalton, Mr. Schofield, and Mr. McIsaac, whom I know have put just a tremendous amount of time into ensuring that the interests of VRE and the parent commissions are well protected as we embark on this together. So congratulations all, and thank you, commissioners. Which leads right into the DRPT report. So Director Mitchell, I think you have with you actually a colleague, Mr. Brule, to talk about the 495 American Legion Bridge project as well. So over to you both.
I will keep my report very short because most of it is covered in my written report. I will just note that the CTB will be meeting next week on the 9th. We will be recommending for approval the FY21 six-year plan amendments, which will allocate the rest of a full year of operating funds to all of the transit agencies across the state. We did have a $6 million increase in our operating funds over last year due to the omnibus bill. And so, again, that'll be going to the CTB. Two other items of note as well is they will be asked to vote on the commuter choice program recommendations. And also we'll have a presentation with recommended changes to the WMATA 3% policy as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and defer the rest of my report for, I think, our next presentation. Thanks. And by the way, I do want to also just really thank Rich, Mark, Steve, the rest of the VRE team for the agreements. Thank you to all of you for the affirmative vote. It's been a great partnership, and I'm really excited about moving forward with the next chapter on our Transforming Rail program.
Thanks very much. And Mr. Brule is with you, correct? Or we have an unrelated presentation from the Commonwealth? Is that right?
Yes,
Madam Chair. She is up next, and she should be here.
Just happens to be that way in the order. In that case, let me myself welcome Jen rather than turning to Director Mitchell to do it. Mr. Brule, thank you very much. We're glad to have you to talk about the American Legion Bridge Transit Study and TDM feature as well, which I think is going to be a really important part of what otherwise could be a heck of a lot of asphalt. So glad you're with us to talk about the transportation or transit and TDM elements of it.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm pleased to be with you this evening to give you a briefing on the I-495 American Legion Bridge Transit and TDM study. I will do my best to keep this brief and of course, offer to anyone on the commission, if you'd like a more in-depth briefing, we'd certainly be willing to do that at any point in time. Next slide, please. So this study really grew out of the Capital Beltway Accord that was announced by Governors Northam and Hogan about this time last year to rebuild the American Legion Bridge and connect managed lanes on either side of the river. This study was launched about the same time with the intent to develop and prioritize some transit options and travel demand management techniques that would enhance bi-state travel across the bridge. It is intended to complement the work that's going on by VDOT right now on I-495 Next and Maryland's Managed Lane Study, but it is important to mention that it is completely separate from those improvement projects. We are funded and managing the study itself jointly with our partners at the Maryland Department of Transportation. They've been fantastic to work with throughout this process. Next slide, please. We've also been very fortunate to work with a very diverse and dedicated group of stakeholders throughout the effort. Many of your jurisdictional staff, the transit agencies, and also have to give a shout out to the NVTC staff for being with us from day one on this study. Next slide. We've also worked throughout to engage not only the stakeholders in a series of stakeholder meetings. We've had 3 of those so far. We have another stakeholder meeting and a real pivotal stakeholder meeting scheduled for the end of next week. We've conducted 2 public surveys. One was done back in August, getting some information on the status of commuting choices in the corridor. Our second survey is live right now, looking to get feedback on potential recommendations. Additionally, we held a public meeting in mid-November. We are planning another public meeting to coincide with the release of our recommendations in early January. That will be part of a formal public comment process we anticipate will run from about mid-December to late January, early February. We do have a lot of information on the study on our webpage, and we have been accepting stakeholder comments throughout the process. Next slide. We have followed a very typical transportation study process. We started out by looking at transit needs in the corridor, existing services in the corridor. We've reviewed the travel markets between the 2 states, tested a number of different routes and technology and commuter assistance program options. We are now at that pivotal point in the study where all that information comes together as we work to recommend potential improvements that could be implemented in the corridor. Next slide. So in terms of existing transit and rail, there's a significant amount of bus and commuter bus service on either side of the river. I think it's over 11,000 trips per day. But it's very interesting and very important that we note that there is no public transit service currently operating over the bridge. So that's a real gap in our transit network across the region, and it really does present a great opportunity to us in working on this particular study. Next slide, please. In terms of travel demand, we found very high travel demand to a number of key Virginia destinations, primarily Tyson's, Dunloring, but also the Route 7 corridor out to Reston and Dulles, and also to Arlington. The interesting thing we found with travel demand is there is significantly more demand coming from Maryland into Virginia than in the reverse. And the demand on the Maryland side is more dispersed over the study area, where in Virginia it is really focused on some key destination hubs. So that has definitely fed into how our recommendations have been developed. Next slide, please. Just wanted to very quickly show that we've looked at a number of potential transit connections through the process of the study. We have, through a prioritization process, narrowed those down as we've looked at levels of demand and competition with existing transit services. So we did narrow it down to 8. If we can go to the next slide, please. We did use a prioritization methodology that scores our potential routes relative to one another based on 3 categories. We looked at productivity, focused on maximizing ridership, looking at cost factors. We looked at equity and looked at the need to provide service to areas with high concentrations of low income and minority individuals. And then we also looked at connectivity and how we can provide access to the areas with high job concentrations and high population. Next slide. Just to quickly show you how those scores look when you compare them side to side. You do see that we've got a broad range of different options that are being considered that serve different areas and then scored differently in terms of productivity and connectivity and equity. As we move forward with putting together packages, we'll be looking at combinations of routes and service levels. So some of these will adjust as we move forward, but we are feeling very, very positive about what we're seeing with this preliminary route analysis. Next slide. We also are looking at a number of technology and commuter assistance program options. There's a real need for real-time information to help make travel choices and commuting choices related to parking and transit availability. Also, more traditional commuter assistance program options that are targeted for the corridor. So we're looking at some alternatives in that area as well. Next slide, please. So I wanted to put this slide in here. It's a little busy, but in terms of developing the recommendations, we really have gone through a very logical process and stepped through a number of activities with our stakeholders and with the surveys and now also with the public outreach and the public meetings and the public comment period that is upcoming to develop a very sound and reasonable set of recommendations. So you can see we are here. We're getting very close to having those investment packages ready. That's really the last step to be able to roll out a set of draft recommendations that not only talk about potentially different types of services, but then how those services can be combined in different levels of investment and in different timeframes to help provide improved transit access in that corridor. Next slide, please. I think I might have just stole the thunder of this slide. So we are really at this step working with the stakeholders to develop those investment packages. It is really exciting. Secretary Valentine did commit last week that there will be some dedicated ongoing support for transit services along the corridor as part of the 495 Next project. That is really envisioned as an initial commitment that would then lead into and provide the opportunity for future transit expansion beyond that initial commitment along this corridor. So we want to be very mindful and very thorough in preparing those investment packages and putting together a very well-reasoned set of recommendations as this study concludes. So if we can go to the next slide, please. In terms of timeline, we are getting very close. We are working on our draft potential recommendations. We fully realize we're bumping up against the end of the year and the holiday season. It's a hard time to make sure we put out information and provide for adequate opportunities for public engagement and public comment, but we are anticipating that we will be in a position to release those draft recommendations before the end of the year. We would do that along with a formal public comment period, additional public outreach and public meetings before we would finalize those recommendations and memorialize them in the final report early in 2021. So that concludes the prepared presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. DeBrule. I'd love to jump in with one and then open the floor for my colleagues. So this is great to see some of the many opportunities for managing demand as well as providing transit alternatives around this pretty congested area. You described that there's not really a relationship as sort of a companion project to 495 Next. Has there been any conversation about realizing a dedicated transit payment from the 495 Next expansion and toll lanes akin to what we've seen on 395 and 66?
So I was very, very vague in the mention of that, but the Secretary has committed to providing that dedicated type of investment as part of 495 Next. Obviously, to realize the full benefit of the more free-flowing traffic and having the managed lanes, so that transit bus isn't just sitting in traffic with everybody else. It takes the full network, but there's benefit with 495 Next that we think supports that initial investment and that initial phasing in of some transit options as we work to bring the rest of those projects and the connections online.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that. I mean, I think that's been really key, and maybe what this commission especially has learned with 66, having a few of those transit options ready to go, those TDM options ready to go. I won't belabor it because it's not your bailiwick, and my colleagues here who are with me on the authority have already heard me screech about it. But that 495 Next project, for anybody who's not following it, is just a huge environmental impact. I mean, I think it's something like taking out 35 acres of trees, massive stormwater impacts, and I think if we're going to be able to get our heads around welcoming that as a region, it has to be with the acknowledgement that, like, you can't just add that asphalt and expect to be anywhere other than just in the same congestion place, 5 years later, 10 years later. And so I am so glad that you and your team are working on all of these transit alternatives. I definitely hear you that dedicated bus, for example, or other transit options require this expansion. But I hope, and we'll take this forward to just briefly urge, as I did at the authority, that what I is generally going to be a really forward-looking transportation administration will continue to understand the crucial nature of targeting revenues coming off those hot lanes or whatever form they take to transit. So, okay, that's my soapbox. I'm storing it under my desk, and I've great opportunity for my colleagues on the commission to ask questions.
Yes, I do, Madam Chair. This is Supervisor Faust.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. 495 Next is almost totally within my district, so I've been following this pretty closely, except that no one's been following the transit study very closely because it just recently was announced publicly, and we've had one public meeting so far. I couldn't support the transit effort more than I do, and so I'm glad that it's being done. But the assumptions I think you have to make, Jennifer, are that 495 Next, as well as the Maryland managed lanes, as well as the American Legion Bridge itself, are all widened as part of the transit studies you just showed us there. Yeah, that's correct, right?
We, in putting together the investment packages, we are looking at some phasing options where we can look at what the potential is for transit without the managed lanes, without 495 Next, American Legion Bridge, and the managed lanes on the Maryland side. Unfortunately, with the level of traffic, I think that's why you don't see transit going across the American Legion Bridge today. But we are looking at some phasing and what kinds of transit would work with just 495 Next or with pieces of that as those may be developed in different time frames.
Yeah. Now, obviously, for a long time we wanted to do transit. And without these major road projects, you're not going to get the transit improvements. And it's not just 495 Next. I mean, until the Maryland project is done, that buses will be held up at the American Legion Bridge just like the rest of us. So anyway, in the transit commitment, I want to really focus on that because it's critical. And it was announced, as it was ballyhooed when it was announced that there would be a commitment. But when you peel back the layers, it was $700,000 a year, which it doesn't buy you anything in terms of transit. Someone's going to have to do a whole lot better than that, in my opinion. We can't, I think we could have a $25 million a year program on I-66. So I just, if we're going to talk about these things, just don't talk about them to make us feel good. make it real, make it real. And so that's my comments. I really do. I mean, I've been working on, as many of you from VDOT know, on the 495 Next project quite a bit for the last year and a half, and I'm anxious to dig in and participate as much as possible in this transit study going forward. So thank you for making your presentation, and look forward to working with you to try to solve some of our nasty traffic problems around the American Legion Bridge. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Faust. Other questions, Councilman McKay or Chairman McKay?
Madam Chair, thank you. I'll be very brief. I think the presentation was well received. I do share Supervisor Faust's concern about, you know, when this became public and when we ultimately have to take a final position on the 495 Next project. I am happy to see transit money in this. It wasn't in the initial announcement about the project. I do think there's a ways to go, you know, before we reach approval, but that's, you know, part of the process. We started with zero. We're somewhere else now. We need to do a lot better. And frankly, the transit piece is infinitely better, of course, with the Maryland components. And so I'm happy to hear you've looked at different layers in the study, because as much as we all know how important the Maryland piece, nobody in this meeting can control what Maryland does. And so if we don't look at this in various stages, you know, it would be foolish to presume certain things are going to happen until we actually know that they're going to happen. And you know, we certainly had a long conversation about this at our board meeting the other day, and we've sent detailed comments into VDOT on the next 495 project. But I want to make certain that, Jennifer, you and your team also review those comments as it relates to transit, because ultimately, wherever we end up with the transit study, it's going to be heavily impacted by the final agreement on the 495 Next project, just structurally and financially. And so I take Ms. Crystal's comments to heart, but I would also say that, you know, I also represent everyone in the project area, and doing nothing here doesn't help transit. It doesn't help anyone, honestly. And while there's huge environmental impacts, I don't underscore those at all, or undermine those at all. I do underscore them. I do think that, you know, there's time here for the project team to still address those issues. So I think it's important for us to, you know, withhold. I know we're not being asked to make a decision as a commission either on the transit study or ultimately the 495 Next project, but this is one of the reasons why, you know, we need to continue to keep pressure, continue to have the conversation going on this project, because as Supervisor Faust just mentioned, without it, and as Jennifer just mentioned, you know, there's a reason transit doesn't use this area now. And ultimately, we have to decide whether we want transit in this area or not, because without this project, there is no transit other than rail, heavy rail coming into Tysons. And that, of course, is a different problem than the congestion piece that we're trying to solve here. And so certainly appreciate the presentation, the work of DRPT. But I can't emphasize enough in the future, when we do these studies, making sure that there's a public involvement piece earlier on in the project, especially when it is tied specifically to a fast-moving 495 Next project. And many of us have raised concerns from the beginning about the timing of how these two things line up. And I'm still a little bit uncomfortable in knowing how much we're going to ultimately know about this study by the time we have to take a final recommended action. At least our board has to take a final recommended action on the 495 project. So I think that's a lesson to be learned as we move forward. I'm not really blaming anyone here, but I am reiterating that a lot of us are not happy with the timing of how these two things have lined up on really a project of enormous importance.
Thank you. All right. Any other comments or questions? Yeah, Mr. Snyder.
Thanks, Madam Chair. We are really doing something historic, actually putting transit across a bridge between Virginia and Maryland. it's a long overdue. And here's a question. I fully recognize the relationship between the roadway project and the transit project in terms of investment. But if you build the roadway project, doesn't that significantly reduce the number of potential riders on the transit side? And so I'm interested in the juxtaposition of the two, not just from a financial standpoint, but also from a utilization standpoint. I'm also interested in possibly connecting this work to the Route 7 BRT, so you could literally take transit from Alexandria to Bethesda, or Arlington to Bethesda, that would connect through Tyson's Corner and connect with this potentially. So what I'm beginning to see is the emergence of a network that's less reliant on Virginia to DC and looking at places where we've evolved a different set of demands than we had 40 years ago. Not that we would not continue to serve that, but I guess the one thing that COVID-19 is impressing upon me is that, and this project may be part of it, we ought to maybe be focused on providing better transportation within Northern Virginia and linking our systems more, recognizing different utilization patterns, and then creating this connection to Maryland, which anyone who's been on the American Legion Bridge can tell you is so much, very much needed. So I like where we're going, but I'm wondering if the roadway, if this couldn't move, if we found a way to finance it, and of course that's the great question, if we shouldn't continue with this kind of transit planning, even if something were to significantly delay the roadway work. For example, I understand it's really quite controversial in Maryland. There's litigation, disagreements between the state and localities. Shouldn't we, at least for planning purpose, continue the work on this for reducing congestion as well as increasing service and the economies of both Maryland and Virginia, serving them better and linking them together, which, by the way, creates a lot of jobs in Virginia. So just a couple thoughts for consideration.
So I will try to take what I heard 3 or 4 questions there and boil it down into something succinct. In terms of working on continued planning and continued study, I will say that working on a bi-state planning study has been a great experience for us. We have we already had relationships with Maryland and with the Maryland Transit Administration. I would say they are much stronger now as we have worked as equal partners throughout this process. So the 495 American Legion Bridge Transit Study may conclude, but I think the partnership and the coordination is there stronger than it's been before, and I look forward to making sure that continues. In terms of the discussion about the roadway improvement and transit, how those two interrelate, it is more than financial. I think part of the challenge now with transit in that corridor is you can get in a bus with other people and sit in the same traffic that you would also sit in in a single occupant vehicle by yourself. And so I think there's going to need to be some time savings and some benefit. I think you can look at other corridors where we've done this. And if you look at 95 with the express lanes, there is more transit service, a lot more transit service in the 95 corridor. It was already a transit-rich and a carpool-rich environment before the express lanes. There's even more now. And so that benefits not only the users of that service, but it also benefits the toll payer. So I think the nexus between the roadway project is more than financial. It is that time savings and that competitive edge that helps make transit work better in the corridor. And I think I may have lost track of a piece of that question, but hopefully I got most of that for you, Mr. Snyder.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Very interesting. I really wanted to get this kind of thing on the record, so thank you for that. I think the other question I had was linking another project we have, which is the Route 7 BRT with this, because theoretically then you've in essence created an entirely new transportation corridor that's transit, providing potentially both local and cross-state traffic transportation, an option that doesn't exist now.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think we have lots of opportunities to connect the transit that potentially comes out of this study with a lot of other transit and planning efforts in the region. We had a really great conversation with the Fairfax County staff earlier this week at how we can take kind of some high-level planning that comes out of this study and get into some more granular service planning and figuring out how to make those linkages as we advance what comes out of this study once it's complete. So very, very, very good point.
Thank you.
Thanks. A good set of questions. Okay, any others for Mr. Brule? All right, well, thank you so much for bringing this to us. And I think I can speak for all of us when I say I hope the commission can be a partner and as you all figure this out. We really appreciated the chance to partner with the Commonwealth on executing these sort of parallel roadway expansions with transit development in the past, and glad to see you all bring this model forward again, and look forward to staying in touch on it. Okay, anything else from DRPT or questions about DRPT? All right. Hearing none, I don't believe we have a Transit Resource Center presentation tonight, given how packed the agenda was. I know that there are some items that you can find in your packet about ridership and parking utilization. And I think well, let's do this. Let me turn it over to Ms. Mattice to give her executive director report if she wants to add anything that I've missed on the Transit Resource Center materials, or along with anything else. And then, of course, we can take commissioner questions.
No, happy to. Indeed, Madam Chair, there is the latest parking and transit performance included in the materials. And so I'm happy to do my best to close it out. I think we did just pass the 10 o'clock hour, but again, there's lots of stuff in my executive director newsletter. We have a lot of things, of course, going on in the space regarding transit. Just a reminder, our next commission meeting will be on January 7th. So happy New Year and happy holidays to everybody. But in the meantime, I'll once again plug our legislative briefing on Monday morning at 9 o'clock. We're also doing our joint public meeting with our other transportation colleagues within Northern Virginia on Tuesday evening. And that is basically going to be highlighting our commuter choice projects. And I think as what was already announced earlier is that the WMATA committee will be meeting again in January, really diving into the budget issues. Just as a little follow-up, obviously, we do have some follow-ups on some sending letters both to our congressional delegation as well as to leadership down in the General Assembly. Madam Chair, I'll connect back with you. We've had a lot of staff discussions going on in the background. So I think we have a lot of good things. Just as some may not know, we've actually, because of NVTC's strong support for federal funding for transit in previous legislative agendas, we've actually signed on to a number of letters, at least probably 3 or 4 in the last 2 months, really making the case for additional funding. But I think this is going to be very helpful to make a very pointed, specific NVTC ask of our congressional as well as our General Assembly folks. So with that, again, our financial reports are included as well. And so I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Mattice. Ms. Mattice, questions for our executive director? Okay. Do any commissioners have comments or things for the good of the order before we adjourn? Hearing none, I won't prolong it. Thank you all for hanging with us. I think a variety of really important topics tonight, and appreciate everyone's attendance and willingness to hang in there till the late hour of 10 o'clock. So I'm going to adjourn us. Thank you for your participation. Look forward to seeing everyone at our next commission meeting on January 7th, and hopefully seeing you remotely as well on Monday morning as we welcome our 2 senators to talk transit with us. Thanks so much, everyone.
Good night.
Night all.
Good night.
Night.